aren't meant to survive. My breath came out in puffs that froze before they could dissipate, and my goggles were constantly fogging despite the anti-fog coating. My name is Dr. Miles Petrov, and I'm a research assistant, or was before everything went to hell. I was part of a joint expedition between the University of Colorado and the Norwegian Antarctic Research Institute, set to study the effects of climate change on previously unexplored regions of the continent. And what we found instead was something that made the climate the least of our worries. Our base camp, designated Station EO, was a collection of prefabricated modules connected by insulated walkways, positioned on a relatively stable ice shelf about 200 miles from the nearest permanent research station. Our team consisted of 8 researchers and some support staff. Myself, Larson, our expedition leader and glaciologist, Kenji, our atmospheric physicist, Okafor, the marine biologist, Toby, the communication specialist, Ingrid, the camp coordinator, Nathan, our mechanic and just general handyman, and Kari, the geologist. We had been at Station EO for 3 weeks when the first signs appeared that we weren't alone out here. It started with equipment malfunctions, small things at first. Nathan found that several of our snowmobiles had their fuel lines cut, clean slices that couldn't have been caused by wear, tear, or the cold. Ingrid saw that our food supplies were being systematically depleted, with entire cases of rations going missing overnight, despite the storage room being locked up. Larson dismissed these incidents as human error or the effects of the extreme cold on our equipment and supplies. But then Dr. Kari found the tracks. It was during our 4th week at the station. Kari had gone out to collect samples from an exposed rock formation about 3 kilometers northeast of our base. She had taken the usual precautions, an emergency beacon, a satellite phone, and enough supplies for a full day in the field. When she returned that evening, her face was pale beneath her protective gear, and her hands shook as she uploaded her photographic evidence to our shared database. "These aren't animal tracks," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as we gathered around her laptop in the common area. "And they're definitely not human." The photograph showed impressions in the snow that were unlike anything I had ever seen. They were roughly humanoid in shape but enormous, easily twice the size of a human footprint. What made them truly unsettling wasn't just their size, but their depth and the fact that they seemed to show clawed digits, 5 on each foot, with the claws extending several inches beyond what would be normal toes. "Could be a polar bear," Nathan suggested, though his voice lacked any conviction. "Maybe the prints got distorted by the wind or some melting." "Polar bears don't live in Antarctica," Okafor pointed out, "and these prints are too regular, too deliberate." "There's something else," Kari said, clicking to the next set of photos. "These tracks lead in a straight line for over a kilometer, directly toward our base. They stop about 50 meters from our perimeter." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Whatever had made those tracks had been watching us. Larson cleared his throat. "We need to be more careful about our perimeter security. I want motion sensors set up around the camp, and nobody goes out alone anymore. A buddy system always." "Should we report this to the main station?" Toby asked, "and let them know that we might have a problem?" "And tell them what?" Larson replied. "That we found some unusual tracks in the snow. They'll think that we're suffering from cabin fever or altitude sickness. No, we handle this internally for now. Document everything, but let's not create a panic." It was the wrong decision, though none of us knew it at the time. The attacks began 3 days later. I was working late in the lab module, analyzing ice core samples under the microscope, when the lights went out. The sudden darkness was complete and disorienting. There are no streetlights or ambient light sources in Antarctica. The only illumination comes from your equipment and the occasional aurora. And tonight the sky was overcast. The emergency lighting kicked in after a few seconds, bathing everything in a red glow that made the lab look like a scene from a horror movie. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the door, intending to check the generator in the main module. That's when I heard the screaming. It was coming from outside, somewhere between the lab and the sleeping quarters. A human voice, but distorted by terror and pain, rising and falling in pitch like an animal caught in a trap. The sound sent ice water through my veins and made my skin crawl. I fumbled for my radio. "This is Miles in the lab. Does anybody copy? What's happening out there?" Static answered me, and then Toby's voice, strained and breathless. "Something's out there. Something big. It took Ingrid." I grabbed my emergency kit and headed for the door, but before I could reach it, the screaming had stopped. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the screaming had been. "Toby, where are you?" I called into the radio. "In the communications module," came his shaky reply. "Don't go outside. Whatever you do, just don't go outside." I looked through the lab's small window, wiping away the frost that had formed in the inside of the glass. The area between the modules was empty, covered in pristine snow that reflected the emergency lighting. But there, leading away from the camp and into the darkness beyond, was a trail of deep impressions in the snow. Those same footprints that we had seen before, but now they were accompanied by something else. A parallel groove, as if something had been dragged alongside the creature. Something or someone. I keyed the radio again. "Toby, I can see tracks leading away from the camp. It looks like something had dragged Ingrid away." "Miles, listen to me." Toby's voice was urgent. "I've been trying to reach the main station, but all our communications are down. Not just the satellite uplink, but everything. Radio, internet, even the emergency beacon. It's like something jammed all of our frequencies." A chill ran down my spine. That's not possible. The beacon operates on a completely different frequency than our communications. "Well, I know, but I'm telling you, everything's dead. We're completely cut off." I began to understand the true horror of our situation. We were alone, hundreds of miles from the nearest help, with something stalking us in the darkness. Something that had already taken one of our team members. "Where is everyone else?" I asked. "Larson and Nathan are in the main module, trying to get the generator back online. Kenji is in his quarters. Kari and Okafor are in the geology lab. Nobody's seen Ingrid since the power went out." I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of trying to rendezvous with the others, I decided to stay put and wait for dawn. The lab had its own backup power system, independent of the main generator, and it was the most isolated of our modules. If something was hunting us, it would probably check the more central areas first. I barricaded the door with a lab bench and settled in to wait, keeping my radio close and my flashlight ready. Every few minutes I would check in with the others, but as the night wore on, the responses became fewer and more sporadic. Around 2 in the morning, Kenji's voice came through the radio, barely a whisper. "It's outside my window. God, it's looking at me." That was the last that I heard from him. Closer to 4, Nathan screamed over the radio channel, a sound so full of terror that it made me drop my flashlight. The scream cut off abruptly, and when I tried to ring him, there was no response. And by dawn, I was the only one left responding to radio calls. When the sun finally rose, a pale cold disk that provided little warmth but blessed visibility, I emerged from the lab to find Station EO in ruins. The main module's door had been torn completely off its hinges, the metal twisted and mangled as if it had been ripped apart by something with incredible strength. Inside, furniture was flipped, equipment destroyed, and the walls covered in deep gouges that looked like claw marks. But there were no bodies, no blood, nothing to indicate what had happened to my colleagues except for the trails in the snow leading away from the camp in different directions. I spent the morning searching the rest of camp, hoping against hope that I would find someone alive, someone who had managed to hide or escape. What I found instead was more of the same. More evidence that whatever had attacked us was both intelligent and very methodical. In the communications hub, I found Toby's equipment smashed beyond repair, but tucked under his desk, I discovered a handwritten note. "Miles, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. The thing that's hunting us isn't natural. It's too smart. It caught our communications first and then picked us off one by one. I think that it's been watching us for weeks and learning our routines. Check the emergency cache in the supply module. There's a backup satellite phone there. Try to reach the main station. Whatever you do, don't go out alone after dark." The emergency cache contained the backup satellite phone, but when I tried to use it, I got nothing but static. Either the device was damaged or something was still jamming our communications. I was alone, cut off from help, and something was hunting me. That's when I remembered Kari's survey equipment. She had been using a GPS mapping system to chart unexplored areas around our base camp. If I could see her data, I might be able to find the other research stations or emergency shelters in the area. I found her field notes and GPS unit in the geology lab. According to her findings, there was an abandoned research station about 15 kilometers to the northwest, designated on her maps as Station Primo. It had been established in the 1980s but abandoned for unknown reasons. It might have supplies, working communications equipment, or at the very least, a more defensible position than our compromised base camp. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. I packed food, water, supplies, and warm clothing. I also took Nathan's rifle, a heavy caliber weapon that he had brought for just-in-case situations. At the time I thought it was overkill, but now I was grateful for his paranoia. As the evening approached, I made my decision. I couldn't stay at Station EO. It was compromised, and whatever had taken my colleagues would almost certainly return. I had to try to make it to Station Primo, even if it meant traveling through the cold night. I set out just before sunset, following the GPS coordinates that were marked. The first few kilometers were relatively easy, traveling over packed snow and ice with good visibility. But as darkness fell, the temperature plummeted and the wind picked up, creating a whiteout condition that made navigation nearly impossible. I was forced to shelter in my emergency tent for several hours, waiting for the storm to pass. It was during this time, huddled in my sleeping bag with only a chemical heat pack for warmth, that I first heard the sounds. They started as a low rumble, almost below the threshold of hearing. At first I thought it was just the wind, but gradually I realized it was something else. Something moving through the snow around my tent, circling me at a distance. Whatever it was large enough to make the ground vibrate with its footsteps. I lay perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, as these sounds continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes they would stop, and I would hope that the creature had moved on, only to hear them resume from a different direction. It was playing with me, I realized, stalking me, learning my scent, my patterns, and my weaknesses. Eventually the sounds faded away and I managed to get a few hours of fitful sleep. When I woke, dawn was breaking and I was eager to get moving again. But when I emerged from my tent, I found that the creature had left a message. Arranged in the snow around my campsite were pieces of equipment from Station EO. Toby's radio, Kari's hammer, Nathan's toolbox, and there, placed carefully on top of my snowmobile, was Ingrid's ID badge, covered in what looked like dried blood. The message was clear. "I know who you are, I know where you came from, and I'm coming for you." I packed up camp and continued on with my journey, pushing my snowmobile as hard as I dared across the treacherous terrain. The GPS showed that I was still about 8 kilometers away when I saw in the distance a cluster of dark buildings against the white landscape, half buried in snow but clearly artificial. As I approached, I could see that Station Primo was much larger than Station EO. It consisted of at least a dozen buildings connected by covered walkways, with what appeared to be a central command structure and several outlying facilities. Most of the buildings were partially buried in snow, suggesting that they had been abandoned for many years. I parked my snowmobile near what appeared to be the main entrance and approached on foot. The door was sealed but not locked. I was able to force it open with some effort. Inside the station was dark and cold but structurally intact. Emergency lighting flickered on as I entered, powered by some kind of backup system that was still functioning after all these years. The first thing I noticed was that the station was much more sophisticated than our research base. This wasn't a temporary field station. It was a permanent installation, built to house a large team for extended periods. The main corridor was wide enough to drive a vehicle through, and the walls were lined with doors leading to laboratories, living quarters, and storage facilities. The second thing that I noticed was that the station wasn't entirely empty. I had been exploring for about an hour, checking rooms and looking for anything useful when I found the first body. It was in one of the laboratories, seated at a desk as if the person had simply fallen asleep while working. The body was perfectly preserved by the cold, still wearing a Soviet-era research uniform with a name tag that read, Dr. Volkov. The sight of the body wasn't what shocked me. It was the fact that the laboratory was still active. Equipment was humming quietly, computer screens were showing data, and there were recent notations on a whiteboard that couldn't have been more than a few days old. Somebody was still here, still working. I continued through the station more cautiously now, checking each room before entering. I found more bodies, all Soviet researchers from the 1980s, all perfectly preserved, all positioned as if they had died while going about their normal duties. But I also found evidence of recent activity. Fresh coffee in the break room, newspapers from only a few weeks ago, and a maintenance log showing regular entries up until 3 days before. In the central command room, I found what I was looking for, a working communications array. But when I tried to use it, I discovered that all outgoing transmissions were being blocked. The equipment was functioning perfectly, but something was preventing any signals from leaving the station. And that's when I heard the footsteps. They were coming from deeper in the station, in the direction of the laboratories that I hadn't yet explored. Heavy, deliberate footsteps accompanied by the squeak of equipment being moved. Somebody was definitely here and they were working on something. I took out the rifle and checked the ammunition. 5 rounds. Not much, but better than nothing. I followed the sound of the footsteps, moving as quietly as possible through the corridors. The sounds led me to a section of the station that appeared to be heavily modified. The walls were covered in additional insulation, and there were warning signs in Russian that I couldn't read but recognized as hazard warnings. The lighting here was different too. Harsh white that made everything look clinical and sterile. I reached a door marked with a biohazard symbol and what appeared to be a laboratory designation. Through the small window I could see movement inside, somebody in a full hazmat suit working on a series of lab benches. I knocked on the door. The movement inside stopped immediately. After a moment, the figure in the hazmat suit turned toward the door. Even through the protective gear, I could see that they were gesturing for me to enter. I opened the door and stepped inside.
Dr. Petrov, I presume.
The voice said, Russian, and came from a speaker system built into the hazmat suit.
We've been expecting you.
Who are you? I asked, keeping the rifle ready but not directly threatening. How do you know my name? The figure reached up and began to remove the hazmat helmet. Underneath was a man who appeared to be in his 60s, with gray hair and pale eyes. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I might have seen him before.
I am Dr. Viktor Petrov,
he said, and my blood ran cold.
I believe I'm your grandfather.
I stared at the man claiming to be my grandfather, my mind racing. My grandfather Victor had died when I was a child, or at least that's what my family had always told me. He had been a Soviet researcher who had disappeared here in Antarctica in the 1980s, presumed to be dead. The family had grieved and they moved on. But here he was, standing in front of me, apparently alive and well after more than 30 years. No, that's impossible. I said, though even as I spoke, I could see the family resemblance. The pale eyes, the same stubborn jawline that I had inherited from my father.
Many things are impossible, yet they happen nonetheless. Please, lower your weapon. We have much to discuss in very little time.
I didn't lower the rifle, but I didn't aim it directly at him either. You're supposed to be dead. My family held a memorial service.
Unnecessary fiction,
Victor said, moving to one of the lab tables.
My work here was too important to abandon, too dangerous to acknowledge. Your government and mine agreed that it was best if I simply disappeared.
What kind of work? I asked, looking around. It was clearly a research facility with strange equipment that I didn't recognize, and specimens in various stages of preservation. Victor gestured to a series of photographs pinned to a bulletin board. They showed different tissue cultures and what appeared to be anatomical drawings of some kind of creature.
We are studying the indigenous life forms of Antarctica. Life forms that predate human civilization by millions of years.
I looked more closely at the photographs and felt my stomach lurch. They weren't like any animal that I had ever seen. The bone structures were massive and the muscle tissue incredibly dense. The neural networks far more complex than anything in the animal kingdom. You're studying the creature that attacked my team.
Creatures,
Victor corrected.
There are several of them, possibly a small breeding population. We've been observing them for decades, trying to understand their biology.
And you just let them hunt us. You could have warned us. Victor's expression was grim.
Warning you would have meant revealing our existence, and our work here is too important to risk exposure. Besides, you and your colleagues were, how do you say, convenient test subjects.
I raised the rifle again, fury coursing through me. You used us as bait.
Not bait, subjects. We needed to observe how the creatures interact with modern humans, how they hunt and how they adapt to new threats. Your presence here provided us with invaluable data.
My colleagues are dead.
Yes, and their sacrifice has advanced our understanding considerably. Now let me show you what we've learned.
He led me deeper into the laboratory past rows of specimens and preservative fluid and banks of computer equipment. At the far end of the room was a large observation window looking into what appeared to be a holding cell. Inside the cell was one of these creatures. It was even more terrifying up close than I had imagined. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, it had a roughly humanoid shape, but with proportions that were utterly alien. Its arms were disproportionately long, ending in hands with 4 fingers and an opposable thumb, each digit tipped with claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. Its legs were powerful, like a wolf's, ending in feet with 5 clawed toes. The head was the most disturbing part, vaguely human in shape with a pronounced snout filled with sharp teeth, and eyes that held an intelligence that was both ancient and malevolent. The creature was pacing back and forth in its cell, occasionally stopping to stare directly at us through the observation window. When it did, I could see that its eyes were not just intelligent. They were calculating, evaluating, and planning.
We call them the originals, Victor said. We believe they're the first inhabitants of this continent, predating the Ice Age by millions of years. They survived the climate changes by adapting, by becoming something more than animal but less than human.
How many of them are there? I asked, unable to look away from the creature.
We've identified at least 6 individuals in this region, possibly more. They appear to have a complex social structure, with individuals taking on different roles within their group. Some are hunters, some are scouts. Some appear to be leaders.
And they're intelligent.
Extremely. They've learned to use tools to plan coordinated attacks, to adapt their hunting strategies based on their prey. The one that attacked your base camp had been observing you for weeks.
I felt sick. And you watched this happen.
We documented it, Every moment, and now we know more. This knowledge will be invaluable when they begin to expand their territory.
Expand their territory? What do you mean? Victor turned to me, his expression grave.
The ice is melting, Miles. New areas are opening up in Antarctica that have been frozen for millions of years. And the originals are already adapting, already expanding their range. In another decade, they'll begin to spread to other continents.
No way. They couldn't survive outside of Antarctica.
Couldn't they?
Victor gestured to a map on the wall showing global temperature changes. The northern reaches of Canada, Siberia, Alaska. These are becoming more like Antarctica every year. The originals are perfectly adapted to these conditions. They're also intelligent enough to learn and to adapt further. I stared at the map. You're saying that these things could spread across the world?
It's not a question of could. It's a question of when. And that's why our work here is so important. We need to understand them before they become a global threat.
Or we could just eliminate them. Kill them before they can spread.
No, impossible. They're too smart. Military force would only make them more dangerous. No, the only way to deal with them is to understand them completely. To learn how to coexist.
Coexist? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These things killed my friends.
Yes, because your friends were in their territory, threatening their survival. But if we can communicate with them, if we can reach some kind of understanding...
You're insane. Victor's expression hardened.
I'm a scientist. I deal in facts and not emotions. The fact is that the originals are here, they're smart, and they're not going away. We can either learn to live with them or we can face extinction ourselves.
I was about to respond when an alarm began to sound throughout the laboratory. Red lights flashed and a computerized voice began speaking in Russian. Victor's face went pale.
They found us, he said.
What?
The originals. They've located the station. We're under attack.
As if to confirm his words, I heard the sound of metal being torn apart, coming from somewhere in the direction of the main entrance. The creature in the holding cell had stopped pacing and was now standing at the observation window, its head tilted as if listening to something. How many of them? I asked, checking my rifle again.
All of them. They've come for their captured packmate.
The sounds of destruction were getting closer. I could hear the creatures moving through the station, searching every room. It was only a matter of time before they found us. Is there another way out? Victor nodded toward a door at the far end of the laboratory.
Emergency exit. It leads to a tunnel system that connects to several outlying buildings, but they'll be watching for that too.
Well, then we need a distraction, I said, looking at the creature in the holding cell. What happens if we release it?
Are you mad? It would kill us both.
Maybe it would distract the others long enough for us to get out of here. Either way, we're dead if we stay. Victor considered this for a moment and then nodded reluctantly.
There's a manual release switch for the holding cell, but once it's activated, we'll have perhaps 30 seconds before the creature breaks free.
And then we'd better be ready to run. I positioned myself at the emergency exit while Victor moved to the control panel for the holding cell. The sounds of the approaching creatures were very close now. I could hear them in the corridor just outside of the laboratory. On 3, I whispered. 1, 2, 3. Victor hit the release switch and the door to the holding cell began to slowly rise open. The creature inside immediately sensed the change and moved toward the opening. We ran. The exit led to a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into darkness. I could hear the creature behind us, now free and undoubtedly confused by our presence and the scent of its packmates elsewhere in the station. We ran as hard as we could through the tunnel, my flashlight bouncing wildly as we navigated the twists and turns. Behind us, I heard the sound of the creatures finding each other, their low rumbling calls echoing through the tunnels. They would be after us soon, but for now they seemed to be focused on their reunited packmate. The tunnel led to another building smaller than the main station but still substantial. Victor led me through it quickly, gathering supplies, food, water, cold weather gear, and most importantly, a different set of weapons.
This is an old Soviet military base, he explained as he handed me a more modern rifle. We maintained it just in case.
How long have you been planning for this? I asked.
Since the first day we discovered the originals. We always knew that eventually they would find us, that we would have to abandon it. The question was whether we could complete our research before that happened.
And did you? Victor pulled out a small data storage device.
Everything we've learned about them is on here. If we can get this information to the outside world, we might be able to prevent a global catastrophe.
What are their weaknesses?
They're vulnerable to certain frequencies of sound. Ultrasonic waves disrupt their neural patterns. They're also susceptible to a specific chemical compound found in certain plants. And most importantly, if you can eliminate the alpha of the pack, the others become disoriented and vulnerable.
How do you identify the alpha?
Well, size primarily. The alpha is always the largest and most aggressive. It also has distinctive markings, scars and patterns that indicate its status.
We reached the exit of the building and Victor paused to check the outside through a small window.
Clear, but they'll be tracking us. We need to reach the comms array in the outer station.
I thought that all communications were jammed.
Not all of them. There's a hardwired system that connects to a satellite array. It's our only chance to get this info out.
We left the building and began to make our way across the open ground toward a smaller structure about 200 meters away. The snow was deep here and it was tough sledding. Behind us, I could hear the sounds of the creatures searching the station that we had just left. We were halfway to the comms building when the first of the originals appeared behind us. It was massive, even larger than the one that I had seen in the holding cell. This had to be the Alpha that Victor had mentioned. It stood on its hind legs, scanning the area with its intelligent eyes, and when it spotted us, it let out a roar that seemed to shake the very ground.
"Run!"
Victor shouted, and we sprinted the remaining distance to the comms building. The Alpha gave chase, moving with surprising speed across the snow. Its packmates emerged from the station behind it, at least 4 more of them, all converging on our position. We reached the building just as the Alpha caught up to us. Victor fumbled with the door lock while I turned to face the creature, raising my rifle. The Alpha was even more terrifying up close than I had imagined. Its eyes held not just intelligence but something approaching wisdom, an ancient knowledge that came from millions of years of survival. It studied me for a moment, tilting its head as if trying to understand what I was exactly. And then it attacked. I fired 3 shots center mass and the bullets found their mark, but the creature barely seemed to notice. It kept coming, closing the distance between us in seconds. Its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my protective gear and drawing blood. "Miles!" Victor shouted. "The door!" I rolled away from the Alpha and dove through the doorway that Victor had finally managed to open. He slammed it shut behind us just as the creature's claws scraped against the metal.
"That won't hold them for long," Victor said, moving to a bank of communications equipment. "I need maybe 5 minutes to establish a connection and transmit the data."
I could hear the creatures outside, testing the door of the walls, looking for a way in. The Alpha was directing the others, its rumbling calls coordinating their efforts. "They're going to break through," I said, reloading my rifle.
"Well, then we need to make sure they don't reach the communications array,"
Victor replied, working frantically at the controls. The building shook as the creatures threw themselves against the walls. I could see claws penetrating the metal sheeting, slowly tearing it apart. "How long?" I asked.
3 minutes, maybe 4.
"I don't think we have 3 minutes." The wall to my left buckled inward and I could see the Alpha's massive form silhouetted against the opening. It was trying to tear its way through the metal with its bare claws and it was succeeding. I fired several shots through the gap, but the creature was too smart to expose itself fully. It continued to work at the wall, gradually enlarging the opening. "In 2 minutes," Victor called out. And that's when I remembered the chemical compound that Victor had mentioned, the one that was toxic to the originals. I looked around the building and spotted what I was looking for, a fire suppression system. If I could activate it, the chemical suppressant might be enough to drive them back. I found the manual activation switch and pulled it. Immediately, the building filled with a dense white foam, and I heard the creatures outside recoil with roars of pain and anger. 1 minute, Victor said. The foam seemed to be working. The Alpha had stopped trying to break through the wall and was backing away from the building. But I could see that the other creatures were circling, looking for another way inside. "I got it. Data transmitting now. How long?" 30 seconds. The creatures had found another way in through the roof. I could hear them tearing at the metal sheeting above us, and pieces of debris were starting to fall. 20. A section of the roof gave way and one of the creatures dropped through the opening. It was smaller than the Alpha but still massive, and it was clearly disoriented by the chemical foam. I emptied my rifle into it, and this time the bullet seemed to have more effect. The creature stumbled and fell, but it wasn't dead. 10 seconds. The Alpha had overcome its aversion to the chemical foam and was forcing its way through the wall opening. Its eyes were focused on Victor, who was still working at the console. 5 seconds. 5 seconds. I threw myself between the Alpha and Victor, drawing my sidearm, a pistol with only 6 rounds. The creature was on top of us when Victor had shouted, "Done. Completed." The Alpha reached out with one massive clawed hand and I fired every round I had into its face. The creature roared in pain, but it didn't stop. Its claws caught me across the chest again and I felt myself being lifted off the ground. And that's when the building exploded. I woke up in a medical facility surrounded by white walls. For a moment I thought that I was back at the laboratory at Station Primo, but then I noticed the modern equipment in the view through my window. Not a snowy wasteland, but a city skyline. "You're awake," a voice said. I turned to see a man in a doctor's coat standing beside my bed. He was middle-aged with kind eyes and a concerned look. "How are you feeling?" "Where am I?" I asked. "Morrison Station Medical Facility," he replied. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. You have severe hypothermia, multiple lacerations, and a concussion. But you're alive." "Victor, my grandfather." The doctor's expression grew somber. "I'm sorry. There was only one survivor found at the explosion site. The rescue team found you buried under debris about 50 meters from what remained of that building." I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of grief and relief. Victor had sacrificed himself to ensure the data transmission had been completed. At least his decades of research wouldn't be lost. The explosion, though, what caused it? "We're not sure. The rescue team found evidence of some kind of chemical reaction, possibly involving the building's fire suppression system. The entire communications array was destroyed." "But the transmission, did it get through?" The doctor looked puzzled. "What transmission? There's no record of any communications from that facility. The site had been abandoned for decades." My heart sank. Had it been lost in the explosion? "I need to speak to whoever's in charge of the rescue operation," I said, trying to sit up. "There are things that you need to know about what happened out there." "Well, that would be Colonel Sarah Matthews. She's been waiting to debrief you. But first, you need rest. You've been through severe trauma." "No, this can't wait. People need to know what's out there." The doctor reluctantly agreed to contact Colonel Matthews, and within an hour, I found myself in a secure briefing room with several military and civilian officials. Colonel Matthews was a stern-looking woman in her 50s. with gray hair and sharp eyes that suggested she had seen more than her share of classified briefings. "Dr. Petrov," she began, "we need to understand exactly what happened out there at Station Primo. Your original research team was found dead at Station EO, and you were discovered alone at an explosion site that shouldn't have had any active personnel. We need answers." I told them everything. The attacks on our team, the discovery of Station Primo, my grandfather's research, the creatures that we called the Originals. I described their intelligence, their hunting patterns, and their potential threat to global security. When I finished, there was a long silence in the room. Colonel Matthew traded glances with the other officials before speaking. "Dr. Petrov, you've been through an extremely traumatic experience. Hypothermia and head injuries can cause vivid hallucinations, even false memories." "I'm not hallucinating. Everything that I've told you is true. There are creatures out there that pose a serious threat to everyone. We need to do something about it." "Even if we believed your account," one of these civilian officials said, "we found no evidence of any creatures at either station. No tracks, no DNA, no bodies." "Yeah, because they're smarter than us," I explained. "They know how to cover their tracks and how to avoid being found. That's what makes them so dangerous." Colonel Matthews leaned forward. "Dr. Petrov, I'm going to be direct with you. We have satellite imagery of both stations from the past month. There's no evidence of any large life forms in that area. Your colleague's body shows signs of exposure and equipment failure, not animal attacks." I stared at her, shocked. "No, that's impossible. I saw the claw marks and the tracks in the snow." "What you saw were the effects of extreme cold on metal and ice formations that can look like tracks to somebody under stress. Your grandfather Victor Petrov died in 1987. Station Primo was abandoned the same year after a chemical accident had killed the entire research team." "No, I spoke with him. He showed me everything. The creatures were in the holding cells." "There were no holding cells at Station Primo. The station was a geological research facility and nothing more. When our team looked at the explosion site, they found evidence of you attempting to operate communications equipment that had been non-functional for decades." I felt like the world was tilting beneath me. "But the data transmission, Victor said that he sent the information about the creatures." "There was no transmission, Dr. Petrov. The equipment hasn't worked in forever." They were wrong, they had to be. But as I sat there looking at their faces, doubt began to creep into my mind. Had I really seen what I thought I had seen? Could my grandfather really have been alive after all these years? "I need to go back. I need to see the site again." "That's not possible. The area has been declared off-limits due to structural instability. Besides, you're in no condition to return to the field." "Well, then send a team. Do a proper investigation. Look for those creatures for any evidence of what my grandfather found." "Dr. Petrov," the colonel said, her voice becoming more firm, "there will be no further investigation. This incident is being classified as an equipment failure resulting in the tragic loss of 7 researchers. You're the sole survivor of a terrible accident and nothing more." "You're covering this up," I realized. "You know something." Colonel Matthews stood up, ending the briefing. "You'll be transported back to the United States for further medical evaluation and psychological treatment. I suggest you focus on recovering from your ordeal rather than pursuing fantasies about monsters in the ice." As I was escorted back to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were hiding something. But what? And why? 3 weeks later, I was back in Colorado, officially on medical leave from the university. The official report listed the incident as equipment failure due to extreme weather conditions. My colleagues at Station EO had died from exposure after their heating systems had failed. I had suffered severe hypothermia and head trauma, leading to hallucinations and false memories. The story was neat, tidy, and completely wrong. I tried to continue my research to find evidence that would support my account of what had happened. I reached out to other researchers looking for similar reports of unusual encounters or unexplained disappearances. What I found was a pattern of stories that had been suppressed, witnesses who had been discredited, and evidence that had mysteriously disappeared. But I also found something else. A package waiting for me at my apartment with no return address and no postmark. Inside was a data storage device and a handwritten note. Miles, if you're reading this, then my transmission was successful after all. The data on this device contains everything we learned about the originals. Use it wisely. They're still out there and they are spreading. The ice is melting and they are adapting. Someone needs to be ready when they make their move. Trust no one in authority. They know more than they're admitting. V. I plugged the device into my computer with trembling hands. It was all there. Decades of research. And most importantly, a detailed map showing the originals' territories across Antarctica and migration patterns that extended far beyond the continent. According to Victor's data, the creatures weren't just in Antarctica. They had already established footholds in northern Canada, Siberia, and even Alaska. Smaller populations but growing, and they were learning and getting used to the new environments. There was also something else in the data, a set of rules that Victor had developed for surviving encounters with the originals. 1. Never travel alone in their territory. They are pack hunters and will isolate single targets. 2. Maintain constant communication with your team. They will attempt to cut off your comms before attacking. 3. Avoid metallic sounds and bright lights after dark. These attract their attention and mark you as prey. 4. If you encounter one, do not run unless you have a clear escape route. They're faster than humans and running triggers their chase instinct. 5. If attacked, target the eyes and throat. These are their only vulnerable areas that conventional weapons can penetrate. At the bottom of the rules was a final warning. The originals are not mindless beasts. They are very intelligent and utterly ruthless. They've survived millions of years for a reason. I stared at the data for hours on end, trying to process everything that it held. If Victor was right and they were already spreading outside of Antarctica, then humanity was facing a threat unlike anything in recorded history. And the authorities either didn't know, didn't believe, or were actively suppressing the information. I made a choice that would change my life forever. I couldn't trust the official channels, I couldn't rely on the government or the military to take action. Somebody had to warn people. Somebody had to prepare for what was coming. I began to work on a plan to return to Antarctica to gather more evidence and to document the creatures and their capabilities. It would be dangerous and probably fatal, but it was the only way to prove the truth. 6 months after my return from Antarctica, I received another package. This one contained a single item, a photograph taken by a trail camera in northern Ontario. The image showed a creature emerging from the tree line, clearly one of the originals, but smaller than the ones that I had encountered. It was looking like it was hunting and stalking something outside of the camera's view. The photograph was dated just 3 days earlier. They had made it to North America. I tried to contact the authorities, but it seemed that my messages and calls were being monitored and blocked, and I was told that they were unavailable. It became clear that there was an active effort to suppress information about the originals. But why were they doing this? The answer came in the form of an encrypted message from an anonymous source. They've been tracking the creatures for decades. Project Ark, military black ops. They're not trying to stop them, they're trying to weaponize them. The creatures are too smart to control, but they're trying anyway. They see them as the ultimate biological weapon. You need to get out. They know what you're doing and they're coming for you. I didn't have time to verify the message. That same night, I was awoken by the sound of vehicles outside my apartment. I looked out the window and saw black SUVs parked on the street, men in dark suits standing beside them. I grabbed all of my research, Victor's data, and what few belongings that I could carry, and I made it out through the fire escape. By the time that the agents broke down my door, I was already 3 blocks away. I went underground, literally and figuratively. I found shelter in a network of researchers and other whistleblowers that I had cultivated through my time looking into this. People who understood the importance of what we were facing and the danger of government suppression. At this point, I didn't have many other options, so I decided to go public with all of my findings. I created anonymous accounts and began sharing Victor's work, my own experiences, and the growing body of evidence that I had found. I posted the photographs, some of the biological data, and most importantly, the rules for survival. Not soon after, I received a message through one of my accounts. "Dr. Petrov, we know who you are and what you've been through. We need your help. The situation is much worse than you know. The creatures aren't just expanding their territory, they're preparing for something. We have evidence of coordinated behavior across multiple continents, as if they're building towards some kind of global event. We're working on a response, but we need people with your knowledge and experience. Are you willing to help out? The meeting point is attached. Come alone, trust no one else." The meeting point was a location in northern Canada, close to where the trail camera had photographed the creature months earlier. It was obviously a trap either by the government or by someone worse, but it was also my only chance to make a real difference, to be a part of an actual response to the threat. I made my decision. I would go to the meeting even if it killed me. The journey to northern Canada took 3 days of careful travel, using false IDs and avoiding any major transportation hubs. When I finally reached the coordinates, I found a small research station in the middle of the wilderness, the kind of facility that could be easily overlooked by satellite surveillance. Inside, I met the people that sent the message. It was a mixture of scientists, military personnel, and intelligence operatives from multiple countries, all united by their knowledge of the original's threat and their frustration with official inaction. Their leader was Colonel Morrison, a former U.S. Special Forces officer who had encountered the creatures during a classified operation in Alaska. His team had been hunting for what they thought was a terrorist cell, only to discover that the real threat was something far older and more dangerous. "And Dr. Petrov," Morrison said as I had entered the briefing room, "we've been following your work. Your grandfather's research has been invaluable to our understanding of these creatures. What exactly are you planning to do about them?" I asked. "Straightforward enough. Locate their breeding sites and command centers. Use coordinated strikes against these locations and hope to disrupt their expansion and force them back into the polar regions." "I like it. Let's not waste any time. When do we start?" I asked. The first mission was scheduled for 2 weeks later, targeting what satellite imagery suggested was a major originals gathering point in northern Alaska. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifyingly dangerous in execution. A small team would infiltrate the area, deploy a sonic disruption device, and retreat before the creatures could mount any sort of response. The insertion team consisted of 5 people, myself and Morrison included. We flew into Alaska under false identities and then traveled overland using snowmobiles and other cold weather survival gear. The target site was a valley about 70 kilometers from the nearest human settlement, identified by satellite imagery as showing unusual thermal signatures and what appeared to be a large-scale construction activity. We believed it was either a major breeding site or a command center, where the creatures were planning their next phase of expansion. As we approached the valley, the first thing that I noticed was the silence. In most wilderness areas, there is always some sort of sound. Bird, insects, small animals moving through the underbrush. But here there was nothing. Even the wind couldn't be heard. "They know we're here," Morrison whispered. "Stay alert." We crested a ridge overlooking the valley and saw something that we couldn't believe. The entire floor of the valley had been modified. transformed into a massive communal space. The most disturbing were the originals themselves. There were dozens of them, possibly over 100, gathered in the center of the valley in what appeared to be some kind of organized assembly. We positioned the sonic disruption equipment on the ridge overlooking the valley, with clear sight lines to the creatures below. The device was about the size of a briefcase and looked innocuous enough, but it would generate infrasonic pulses powerful enough to disrupt original communication across a radius of several kilometers. And once we activate this, they'll know that something's wrong. We'll have maybe 10 minutes before they adapt or overcome the effects. Well, then we'd better make these 10 minutes count. Morrison replied, checking his weapons one final time. We activated the device and immediately we could see the effect on the creatures below. They were confused and disoriented, moving erratically as some fall into the ground and clutching at their heads. It's working. But our celebration was premature. Even as the majority of the creatures were affected by the sonic disruption, a few of the larger ones seemed to be adapting it. They began to move with purpose again, organizing the other confused creatures and directing them toward our position on the ridge. They're adapting faster than we had expected. We need to go now. We began to withdraw, but it was too late. The originals had already located us and they were moving up the ridge toward us at lightning speed. Even though they were disoriented and confused, they were still incredibly dangerous. The device, we can't leave it. Forget about it, we need to. But Morrison's words were cut off as the first of the creatures reached our position. It was one of the larger ones and it moved with the deadly grace that I remembered from my encounters in Antarctica. One of the lieutenants opened fire, targeting the creature's eyes and throat. The bullets found their mark and the creature stumbled, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a roar that seemed to cut through the sonic disruption, rallying the other creatures to its position. Move, 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 Morrison shouted and we began a fighting retreat down the backside of the ridge. But we were badly outnumbered. For every creature that we disabled or drove back, 2 more took its place. They were learning to work around the effects of the sonic disruption, adapting their tactics in real time. One of our sergeants was the first to fall. She had positioned herself to cover our retreat when 3 of the creatures had flanked her. Even with her weapon and training, she couldn't handle 3 of them at once. Her screams echoed across the valley as they overwhelmed her. No, Morrison called out, starting to turn back toward her position. She's gone, I shouted, grabbing his arm. We can't do anything for her now. We continued to retreat, but the creatures were gaining on us. And by the time that we had reached our snowmobiles, only Morrison, myself, and one of the doctors remained. The creatures had stopped pursuing us, apparently content to have driven us away from their home base, but we knew that it was only a temporary reprieve. As we made our way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had witnessed something that would change everything. The originals were not just trying to expand their territory, they were preparing for a war, and humanity was losing. It's been 6 months since our attempted rendezvous at their base and since the expansion began. The official casualty count is in the hundreds of thousands, but the real number is probably much higher. Entire regions of northern Canada, Alaska, and Siberia have been declared uninhabitable. The governments continue to claim that the attacks are the result of terrorism or natural disasters, but fewer and fewer people believe the official stories. At this point, I'm not overly optimistic, and I think that it might be too late. Those in charge have let this go on for far too long, and I think that it's now out of their control. Right now, our best hope is to relocate to warmer regions in the hope that it'll hold the originals off from expanding even further. We haven't given up, but we're grasping at straws right now. If anybody has any advice, please let me know. We need all the help that we can get. You would think that in the late 40s, with the red threat rising in both Europe and Asia, the last thing the United States military wanted to do was divert resources for a large-scale expedition to Antarctica. Yet that was exactly what they did. We were told that it was a simple expedition to test the techniques and equipment needed to sail a Navy task force into the Antarctic and establish a military base on an ice shelf. That was what we were initially informed, at least. However, even a leatherneck officer like me had doubts over the operation's true objective. From the start, I had suspicions over the purpose of the operation, especially since we were ordered to keep our true destination a secret, and only tell our family and friends that we were simply heading for exercises in the South Pacific. This made me curious. We've had similar operations to the Antarctic before, so why keep this one a secret? What was so different about this one that they didn't want the public to know? One of my fellow Marine officers, Second Lieutenant Rick Jason, tried to convince me that all the secrecy was to prevent the Russians from catching wind of the operation and interfering with it. And that was a reasonable conclusion, but I wasn't convinced. The presence of our Marine battalion, as well as a Marine tank platoon, told me that there was more security than necessary for this expedition. After leaving Norfolk in early December and rendezvousing with the gathering ships of the task force a few days later, I'm pretty sure Jason was no longer convinced of his conclusion either. From our ship, we could see more than 24 vessels ranging from warships to transports. I was no expert regarding Antarctic expeditions, but I thought this was more than the necessary amount of ships for a simple expedition there. The high number of warships also told me that the desire for heavy security extended towards the naval contingent. After talking to a Navy officer that I befriended on board, my intrigue over the task force's purpose would further intensify. He told me that, all in all, there were 24 vessels in the force. These vessels were 1 amphibious force command ship, 4 icebreakers, 6 attack cargo ships, 1 LST, 6 destroyers, 3 seaplane tenders, 2 fleet oilers, and 1 fleet carrier. The air element of the task force was equally impressive, with 9 PBM Mariners, 4 J2Fs, and 6 HO-3S-1 helicopters. Aboard the seaplane tenders, 6 specially converted R-4Ds and 12 F-8Fs aboard the fleet carrier, as well as 8 HOS-1 helicopters distributed among the icebreakers, command ship, and cargo ships. Aside from our supplies and equipment, he didn't know much about what was aboard the other cargo ships. However, based on communications among the ships of the task force, he said that there was at least a naval construction battalion on one ship, a research team on another, and a unit only referred to as Company X, along with some kind of classified equipment, occupying one entire cargo ship. This latter information attracted my attention. With no means of learning more about them, I instead busied myself with drilling and training my platoon. In the rush to get our battalion into full strength in time for the expedition, the Corps had taken Marines from any place they could get. Some came from base guards, but a majority were fresh from basic training. That meant that me and my platoon sergeant had to constantly drill them in order for them to be proficient and capable of working as a team. Luckily for me, the Sarge was an old hand and was no more than capable of whipping the men into shape. Eventually, the task force reached the Panama Canal and crossed into the Pacific. However, instead of the usual stop at Balboa, where previous expeditions held the last liberties for the personnel before heading to the Antarctic, our force immediately went south. This further emphasized to me the rush that the task force was taking. Whatever the reason we were going to the Antarctic, there was clearly a time element to it. We were in a race, against whom we didn't know yet. As we sailed further south, us Marines in the ship's company began speculating what our true mission was. It was a common topic at the company mess hall, as we debated what we were about to bring our men to. Minerals, Second Lieutenant John Henderson of the 1st Platoon proclaimed one day. We're probably out there to secure a site for mineral mining. Risking our lives in the freezing cold for some lousy minerals. First Lieutenant John Miller replied with a shake of the head. No, we got plenty of those back in the States. I think what we're really going for is oil. There has to be oil beneath the ice there, right? None that I know of. Jason, who was the company's mortar section commander, replied with a shrug. Maybe we're going there to find out. That would explain the security. Maybe the Russians are out there too looking for oil. Really? This much gyrenes for an oil hunting expedition? 3rd Platoon Leader, 2nd Lieutenant Harold Stevens said. No, I think it's gotta be something more valuable than that. More valuable than oil, I chipped in. Yeah, he said with a confident nod. Uranium. We're probably out there looking for uranium. Or perhaps a uranium deposit that had already been discovered, and we're out there to secure it so the Reds won't steal it from us. And that made sense. In the atomic age, uranium was a valuable ore to have, especially when you needed them to make the A-bomb. Out of all the theories we made throughout the journey, that one made the most sense. As we entered the Antarctic waters, the theories seemed to become more likely when the task force sighted 4 Russian ships sailing parallel to our formation. So much for all the attempts at secrecy. Through one way or another, they learned of our expedition and seemed to have sent out a hastily built expedition of their own. From what I could tell, they were composed of 1 icebreaker and 4 transports, a far cry from the might of our force. However, they were manned by either brave or reckless sailors, as they kept close to us, even after our destroyers tried to intimidate and chase them away. Eventually, the task force gave up trying to shoo them away when our ships reached the ice pack, a dangerous area that was filled with floating chunks of ice. The ice pack could prove deadly for unprotected ships. After all, it has had a long history of damaging and sinking ships before. Due to this, the icebreakers had to lead the way, while the rest of the task force followed behind them. This also meant that the destroyers were no longer able to break formation to threaten the encroaching Russians, or else risk being stuck or surrounded by ice. Before entering the ice pack, a portion of the task force was left outside to form an outer task group. This group was composed of the fleet carrier, the 3 seaplane tenders, and 2 of the destroyers. From their position out in open sea, the carrier and seaplane tenders could better launch and recover their aircraft, where they could conduct weather reports and reconnaissance for the portion of the force, the inner task group heading towards the ice shelf. The inner group wasted no time lingering outside the ice pack, as the ships pushed forward at 16 knots. Not far off, the Russians did the same. Initially, during the first day, the ice that we encountered was thin and scattered, allowing us to make good progress southward. However, the next day, the ice became thicker and more packed. It was thus necessary for the icebreakers to clear a way for us, while occasionally maneuvering around to free the unfortunate ships that got caught by ice after a sudden gust of wind blew it towards them. A few of the unprotected ships got damage on their hull's forward frames, but it was nothing too serious that could prevent them from continuing. Watching from the deck of our transport, I looked on anxiously as the ice scraped our hull. The group was moving much slower at that point, no more than 9 knots, yet the sight of ice hitting us still unnerved me. The situation didn't seem to be better for the Russians though, as I looked out in the distance to see their own icebreaker move around to free one of their ships that had been surrounded by ice. As I stared at them, I wondered if the men on board knew what their goal here was. Perhaps they were just like us, clueless and relying on a limited few who knew the truth. By the 3rd day, our team found itself in a small pool of open sea, with the Russians sitting within rifle range from us in the transports. For security, the destroyers lay between us and the Reds, although I doubted they were much of a threat, while our destroyers, icebreakers, and even our command ship and cargo ships were bristling with weapons. The Russians seemed to only have the icebreaker armed with a gun. In reality, we were more of a threat to them than they were to us. I felt somewhat sorry for the Reds. During that moment, it seemed that the delegation of all these warships and grunts to the task force was a bit of an overkill. As we lay there in that small pool with the Russians, We anxiously waited for reports from the HOS-1 helicopter that the task force had launched earlier that morning. With ice seemingly surrounding us, it was hoped that the helicopter could scout around and find a lead towards the open sea at the other side of the pack ice. The Russians, who didn't have helicopters of their own and thus could not easily scout ahead, were forced to wait by and wait for us to move so that they could follow. Eventually, the pilot radioed in that they found a lead that gave a relatively clear path to another pool towards the south. Upon its return and safe recovery, the group once again set sail with 3 of the icebreakers at the lead. The other icebreaker, along with one of the destroyers, stayed behind a little longer in order to block the Russians and delay them for just a bit. They would eventually join us the next day at the new pool, with the Russians not far behind them. The next few days were spent at that new pool as we tried to find a new lead southwards. During that time, the 8 helicopters were busy at work, taking off every day to look for a route from the sky. The lack of movement from our team after each return, though, told us that no viable lead was ever found. Meanwhile, just near us, the 4 Russian transports waited too. Their icebreaker had broken off from their group to search the area for a lead. This left the remaining ships alone, though, and vulnerable to ice that may drift towards them. The time spent stuck there was not without excitement, though, as the expedition encountered its first casualties during that period. On our 4th day in the pool, we began seeing some of the PBM mariners launched by the seaplane tenders from outside the ice pack. Flying low, they often circled our ships in order to both entertain us and intimidate the Reds. After their little air show, they would then pull up and disappear towards the south. We never saw them return, but I assumed that was because they took a different route back to the outer task group. However, according to the Navy officer that I befriended, at least 3 of them had been lost while flying towards the ice shelf. Yet despite these losses, more were sent that way to conduct reconnaissance. I wasn't sure what exactly they were looking for out there, but it was clearly something important enough for the senior command to ignore the casualties. One thing was sure, though, I was glad that I wasn't on board those aircraft. We would eventually spend a week in that pool before one of our helicopter flights found a large enough lead that could bring us south. Immediately, our task group began to sail, heading straight for it. That time, though, we didn't have an icebreaker or a destroyer to stay behind to block the Reds. Since the Russian icebreaker was out doing scouting patrol when we began to get underway, the task group commander assumed that the remaining Russian vessels would wait for its return before setting sail themselves. After all, that made sense given the dangers of the ice. However, to our surprise, the 4 Russian transports quickly got themselves together and began trailing us. It was a reckless move, but it looked like they weren't going to risk the chance of losing us. The lead we followed was treacherous from the start, but we managed to keep a steady pace south. From the deck of our ship, I could see large chunks of ice floating around us, with some occasionally drifting towards the ship and bumping the hull. All I could do, though, was pray that none of the icebergs damage us severely. A day after entering the new lead, we were greeted by the sight of one of the PBMs. However, instead of coming from the south, like when we were still in the pool, this one came from the north. Observing it as the aircraft approached, I noticed that it was struggling in the air. As it got closer, I understood why. One of its engines was disabled. Despite this, the pilots of the PBM began to descend his aircraft and intersect our formation. Flying just ahead of the command ship, it dropped a buoy, before flying away and heading back to the outer task group. The command ship quickly fished out the buoy, and I soon realized that it must have contained a message for the commander. I didn't know what was written on it, but it must have been important enough that they didn't want the Russians hearing it through the radio. Once again, I was glad that I wasn't aboard those PBMs. I would later learn that the one we saw never made it back to the outer group. And 2 more days would pass before anything noteworthy would occur. This time it was due to the weather. As we neared the edge of the ice pack, we began to see a blizzard forming just ahead of us. From our ships, it was impossible to see through it, as heavy snowfall blanketed the area. However, instead of stopping or turning around, the group continued southwards, seemingly undeterred by it. I thought that it was madness. It was obvious that our ships would have a difficult and dangerous time through it. The safest thing to do was to wait for it to pass. Yet we continued on, and we Marines could only brace ourselves for the worst. Moving closer and closer to the storm front, we expected to be hit by heavy snowfall and strong winds. However, as we entered the blizzard, we were surprised to notice that no snow fell on our ship, and now the wind pushed us around and against the ice. Yet we were inside the storm, I was sure of it. Looking around on the deck though, I could see the terrible weather around us, but we ourselves were not affected by it. It was as if there was an invisible dome protecting us. It was baffling. We had no explanation for it, yet we were thankful that it was keeping us safe. However, I may not have known at the time what exactly was causing this strange phenomena, but I had suspicions that it had something to do with the mysterious Company X. For 2 days we sailed safely while the storm raged all around us. Whatever was protecting us, I was glad we had it. However, we were not without incident during that time. The 4 Russian ships that sailed behind us kept close to our rearmost ship, allowing them to safely sail within our dome. This did not sit well with the commander though, as we noticed that the destroyer that took up the rear of our formation slowed down its speed in order to push away the Reds. Reducing its speed every few minutes, the aft portion of the destroyer soon got really close to the bow of the lead Russian ship, with the last Red ship in their formation already at the edge of the dome's protective perimeter. Their lead ship refused to back off, and that was when disaster occurred. Thinking that the Russians needed further intimidation, the destroyer reduced its speed even more. The Russians, though, were determined to continue forward and attempted to swerve past the destroyer on its starboard side. But with the channel surrounded by thick ice on both sides, the Russian ship ended up squeezing itself between the ice and the destroyer. With no space to maneuver, the 2 ships collided with each other. The impact of the Russian transport pushed the destroyer out of its course, making it collide with some thick ice and wedging itself in a position that blocked the already narrow channel. With the Russian ships already in a close formation, their momentum prevented them from stopping in time, even at the slow speed they were already at. The 3 other Russian ships thus collided with each other and remained stuck with our destroyer. Despite this incident, our group did not stop. From the deck of our ship, we watched on as the destroyer crew desperately tried to free themselves from the ice. However, without the aid of an icebreaker, this would be a near impossible task. Eventually, the 5 ships found themselves outside of our protective dome, and one by one, they were lost to the storm. The last we saw of the destroyer was its silhouette being engulfed by the blizzard. There was no time to mourn though, as the group soon exited the ice pack and entered the open sea between it and the ice shelf. Despite there being less ice floating in that part, the area was far from safe, as the weather there seemed to be worse. Strong winds and heavy snow blanketed this space, and it was only the strange dome that kept us safe. However, there was still a problem that we had to tackle. Due to visibility outside the dome being poor, the ships couldn't really see if we were nearing the ice shelf. This brought the risk of us slamming hard into its ice too. To solve this, one of the icebreakers occasionally exited the dome in order to brave the elements outside and scout ahead. It was a risky way of finding our location, but it was the only way that we had. We would end up losing one of the icebreakers from this, but we eventually reached our destination, the ice shelf. One by one, the ships of the group approached the ice, as the icebreakers pushed away any icebergs that might drift towards the more vulnerable ships. Eventually, the ships began mooring themselves along the icy shore, as the first cautious members of the expedition stepped foot on the ice shelf. They were quickly followed by me and my platoon, who became the first Marines off of the ship and on the ground in Antarctica. Wrapped in thick layers of winter protection, we were tasked with escorting the exploration team in their job of checking our new surroundings. Not that I thought they needed escorting. The ice shelf was barren and empty, with no life to be seen. Not even the abundant penguins we saw on the way here occupied this area. Looking around and seeing the storm that raged outside our dome, I surmised that it was probably due to the terrible conditions that normally blanketed this place that prevented anything wanting to live here. Moving away from the shore and moving towards the edge of our protective dome, the exploration team marked out the path as we went, making sure to avoid obstacles like ice ridges, which could make movement for our heavy equipment difficult. Eventually reaching the edge of the dome, I found myself staring in awe at the invisible field that had kept us safe these past few days. Standing close to it, I could hear the muffled sounds of howling winds on the other side, as if I was on the safe side of the window. However, there was nothing physical separating us. I learned this when I saw one of the members of the exploration team, while secured by a rope tied around his belt, moved through the protective dome and disappeared into the blizzard. I watched as the rope was tugged deeper into the storm, as his teammates worked together not to lose it. Eventually, though, the man returned, having used the rope to guide him back. Although shaken and weakened after entering the blizzard, he was relatively fine. After warming up for a few minutes, he only confirmed what we already knew. It was impossible to see anything outside of the dome. With that done, we then decided to turn back and return to where the ships were moored. As we did so, I found myself looking back out towards the storm and staring into the endless blizzard that raged there. Keeping my eyes locked there for far longer than I should have, I was surprised to see a bright light in the distance. Like a lighthouse on a foggy night, it shone there for a brief moment before being lost into the storm. For a brief moment, I felt a chill run down my spine, a chill that I knew was not caused by the cold. Returning to the ship and briefly warming up below deck, we were back on the ice an hour later, as unloading operations began. The battalion was soon divided into different groups, with tasks ranging from establishing a perimeter around our beachhead and escorting the various construction teams that were flattening a path toward the edge of the dome, where our campsite was to be located. At that point, I still thought that having these many Marines to escort any exploration mission was a waste of our time, since there was no real threat out in this empty land. Although the blizzard was a danger for everyone here, it was not something that we Marines could protect them against. Our presence there was unnecessary, or so I thought. Slowly but surely, the personnel and contents of the ships were unloaded onto the ice shelf, as the various companies of our battalion switched from guarding, escorting, and resting. As luck would have it, my company was on escort duty when the men and equipment of Company X was ordered to move up from the disembarkment area and towards the new camp. And during this move, my platoon was given the task of escorting the large Antarctic vehicles they used to transport heavy equipment on the ice. With wheels 20 feet tall, the flatbed 65 feet in length and 22 feet in width, and a reliable diesel-electric hybrid engine, it was a beast of a machine. Company X had two of these behemoths with them. However, as we sat in the M29s that would drive us alongside the vehicles that we were to escort, the payload of these second Antarctic vehicles suddenly took my interest. While the first vehicle had a large stack of crates on it, the second one had a strange tube-like object hidden under a tarp. The tube was long, its length taking up most of the flatbed, but as to what it was, I had no clue. Upon initial look, it seemed like it was a large pole, something that they would probably use for experiments here. However, as we began to move, something intriguing occurred. The protective dome that kept away the blizzard seemed to move with every inch the vehicle made. It soon dawned upon me that whatever equipment lay beneath that tarp, it was the one that had created our field of protection. That astonished me, as it was hard to fathom how a seemingly flat object could do such amazing feats. I must have stared at the payload a little too much during that time though, as a member of Company X, who had hitched a ride on my M29, patted me and gave a toothy smile. "And don't think too hard about it, kid," he told me, remaining silent the rest of the trip. As we moved closer towards the camp, we could see more and more of the ice shelf become clear, as the dome expanded and shielded from the blizzard. It wasn't much to look at though, as it was the same barren flat land that was the main feature of this area. Meanwhile, behind us, the dome receded away from the open sea, moving closer and closer towards the moored ships. Nervously glancing toward them ever so often, I couldn't help but worry if we were going to advance to the point where the ships would end up outside the perimeter. If that happened, what would happen to the men still unloading the equipment? If that happens, will the ships be lost to the storm? How will we get home then? Estimating the size of the dome's perimeter, I calculated that there should be enough space for the ships to be protected once the strange equipment had reached the camp. It'll be a tight squeeze, but it should be enough to keep them safe. And with my worries sated, I returned my focus forward, as the dome continued to push on and calm the raging storm ahead of it. However, as I gleaned beyond the dome and into the blizzard, I caught a glance of a light shining through the storm. It was the same light that I had seen earlier. This time, though, it seemed to grow brighter. I was not the only one to notice this, as many of my Marines and the members of Company X found themselves glancing at it too. However, while my Marines showed cautiousness towards the sight, I noticed that the members of Company X seemed to be excited. It was clear that they knew far more about it than we did. As we continued our approach to the camp and as the dome continued to clear more portions of the blizzard from the ice ridge, a curious silhouette began to appear through the storm. It started just below the light, getting clearer and clearer as we got closer to camp. Straining my eyes as I stared, I eventually recognized a triangular-like shape below the shining light. At first, I thought that it must have been some kind of mountain, probably the first feature in this desolate land. However, as the silhouette entered our protective dome, it soon became clear that it was something else. It was a pyramid, a 1,000-foot tall pyramid. Studying it from a distance with awe, I felt myself entranced at the strange structure. I was unaware of any man-made structure in the area, at least we were never told about it before. So who built that thing? No one seemed to have an answer. Those who did know, though, didn't want to talk. At camp, we secured the gigantic Antarctic vehicles inside a large vehicle maintenance bay that these Seabees had quickly constructed. Following that, I got my platoon to our own corner where we began setting up the tents that would be our temporary refuge here. Until our hut was built, these canvas tents were going to be our home. As me and my RTO worked to set up our tent, I couldn't help but take glances at the looming pyramid in the distance. Its light was ever shining from its tip, as it seemed to watch us with intrigue. In return, I studied it with anxious curiosity. I wondered if our time here would bring answers for me or just open up more questions. Over the next few days, us Marines busied ourselves with securing the camp and building various fighting positions along its perimeter. Cutting holes in the ice, we soon had an elaborate array of trenches surrounding the camp, while the blocks of ice were used to create pillboxes and bunkers at key locations. I still don't know what we were defending the expedition against, but if somebody attacked, I was confident that we were ready. Meanwhile, the Seabees worked hard to construct additional structures within the camp, so that the sea of tents was soon replaced by a sea of huts. Following this, they then got to work constructing an airfield, clearing some snow and laying down Marston mats on the ice. Eventually, we had an operational strip that was ready to take in aircraft. Over the next few days, the R-4Ds aboard the Outer Task Group's fleet carrier were launched and sent to our position. Without protection, though, they endured the same struggle that the PBMs had. Out of the 6 that were sent, only 3 made it to our camp. And during this period, the most curious work done at the camp was those from Company X. Isolating themselves from the rest of us, they built walls using the ice in order to create their own section. This prevented any of us from seeing their huts in the vehicle maintenance bay that stored their special cargo and equipment. We would end up spending a week of boredom at the camp. Well, boredom for us Marines at least. Aside from guarding the perimeter, conducting patrols, and occasionally escorting the various exploration teams, we pretty much did nothing but freeze in the cold. The researchers in Company X, on the other hand, were busy at work conducting experiments and tests all over the place. I didn't care much about most of their tests, but those that involved the distant pyramid always intrigued me. At one point, my platoon was chosen to take a group from Company X towards the pyramid. It wasn't the first exploration team to go there, but it was the first time that I would have the chance to get a closer look at the strange thing. Standing at the base of the pyramid, I felt so tiny as I looked up at the tall structure, yet I felt something else as I stood there. I felt fear. It didn't make sense to me. The structure, although large and seemingly ancient, did not seem something to be feared. After all, it was just another building. Sure, the light shining on top was strange, but there didn't really seem to be anything scary about it at first glance. But being up close to it, standing next to its walls that seemed to be made out of weathered cast iron, I could feel unease take over me. I did my best to hide it, but I often shifted uncomfortably where I stood, as if trying to find a danger that I couldn't see. This feeling wasn't limited to me though, as I saw my men constantly looking around and staying alert. They could sense it too, yet none of us could find the source of this anxiety. For their part, the men of Company X seemed stronger-willed than us or were just getting better at hiding their discomfort. Instead of being worried when next to the pyramid, they seemed more curious and intrigued by it. They also seemed determined to get inside and explore more of it. However, after circling the structure and finding no entrance, that didn't seem like something that was happening soon. Despite this, they didn't let the lack of an entrance stop them. Throughout the day, they tried various methods to get through the wall, from using large drills to placing explosives. At first, I thought at least one of their attempts would work. After all, the walls seemed to be made out of metal only, yet not a single one was successful. In fact, after an inspection of the position of the wall that they tried to break through, there didn't even seem to be a dent. Whatever the actual material this pyramid was made out of, it was definitely stronger than simple iron. Eventually, we headed back to camp. As we made our journey back though, I could see a knowing look on the members of Company X. That told me that they were far from giving up on what they wanted. A day later, I was told that the whole company was to escort Company X to the pyramid. After all, that was more than necessary in this barren land. To use a whole company seemed like overkill. To make things even more strange, we were told that the tank platoon would be joining us. At first, I thought that this meant that they were going to use the tanks to blast a hole into the pyramid, which I thought was foolish. If the explosives later didn't work, why did they assume a tank's gun would be any better? A quick chat with one of the tank commanders did tell me that they were given crates of peculiar new ammunition, whose shells were made out of a material that shone and glinted even in the dark. He wasn't sure what it was, but each one weighed heavier than they looked. Hearing that, it made me wonder if they were going to try to use that to open up the pyramid. However, when Company X rolled out the massive Antarctic vehicle with the tube-like equipment under its tarp, I realized that they had something else planned. Escorting the vehicle once more, this time towards the pyramid, my mind was lost between thoughts of what they planned to do with it and what would happen to the ships when we moved further inland. The transports and warships of the expedition were already moored at the edge of the protective dome, and it wouldn't take long for them to be outside of it and exposed to the dangerous blizzard. Noticing my worried look, the member of Company X who rode with me last time and was riding on my M29 again gave me a reassuring pat on the back. "I guess they don't tell you Marines anything, huh?" he said. Part of the job," I simply replied with a shrug. "Oh, don't worry. The crews of the ships will be fine. They were evacuated from their vessels and entered camp earlier this morning. As for the ships, the crew secured each one with every chain and rope that they had before they left. With any luck, a good number of them won't break loose and won't be damaged once we get that thing back to camp," he explained before gesturing towards the vehicle beside us. I nodded, both relieved and worried at the gamble this expedition was taking on the ships, and then deciding to test my luck, I looked at him and gestured towards the pyramids. "So what exactly do you guys plan on doing once you get it opened?" I asked. He just grinned at me again and shook his head. "Oh, just wait and see," he told me. Reaching the pyramid, Company X began setting up, bringing the vehicle closer and closer towards it. Meanwhile, us Marines set up a defensive perimeter around the structure, with me and my platoon staying close to Company X. This gave us a good view of what they were doing. The same feeling of anxiety began creeping up on me as I stood there, but once again, I suppressed it. It was far easier doing this now though, as my curiosity over what Company X planned on doing occupied a lot of my attention. From my position, I watched as they stopped the vehicle just a few feet from the base of the pyramid, before removing the tarp on the flatbed. Once gone, I finally got to see what they had been hiding underneath it. And it was underwhelming. Instead of the futuristic machinery that I had expected, what lay beneath seemed to be nothing but a large metal pole. A plain metal pole 20 feet in diameter. Although the end that faced me looked jagged and rough, the rest of its surface looked smooth and it seemed to shine brighter than the ice around us. It felt disappointing. There was nothing great about it, and the hydraulic machinery that held it onto the flatbed seemed more interesting than it. Yet that opened up a question. If it was just a metal pole, then how was it able to create this protective dome that surrounds us? Watching them work, I saw the hydraulic machinery that held the pole slowly push it forward, until a good portion of it protruded a few feet ahead of the vehicle. With that done, the vehicle then slowly moved forward, moving closer and closer towards the wall of the pyramid. As the protruding end of the pole got closer, something unbelievable happened. The walls began to open up. Staring with disbelief, my eyes remained fixed as the seemingly impregnable wall of the pyramid parted to form a cave. Eventually, an entrance around 50 feet wide and 50 feet tall was formed, with the mystical pole at the center of it. Us Marines simply gawked and stood there, trying to process and comprehend what had just happened. The entire thing felt unnatural. I couldn't find a reason why thick metal walls like that could simply part open like the way it did, all because of a simple metal pole. Suddenly though, my stunned feeling was quickly dashed away when I felt a chill run through my body. Something was wrong. I could feel it within me. I still didn't know what was causing this feeling, but I knew that it only got worse when the pyramid had been opened up. It was coming from inside. Whatever was making me afraid was coming from there. Turning my gaze toward the newly made entrance and trying my best to see what inside the pyramid could cause so much fear in me, I instead saw something unexpected. Laying inside of it was grass. At first I thought I was mistaken, so I blinked and stared again. But there it still was, green grass. In fact, studying it even more, I noticed that it wasn't just a small patch of grass, but an entire field of it. Looking further inside, I saw the bright green colors seemingly extend deeper into the pyramid, far deeper than I could see from my position. Yet as fascinating as the presence of grass there was, it still failed to answer my main concern. What was making me feel so off about this place? I didn't know the answer to that. However, watching the members of Company X and hearing through the radio that they were calling in for additional equipment to be brought up, I knew that I was about to find out. Over the next 2 hours after the opening was made, more equipment and personnel were brought to our position. Among those sent up was the second Mega Antarctic vehicle, with one of the HOS-1 helicopters on top of its flatbed. Eventually, we had a small camp of our own in this area, with tents being set up left and right as the members of Company X observed and studied the entrance they created, and even dared to enter it. They mostly stayed a few feet from the opening, not daring to go any further than that. However, from the looks on their faces, I could tell that they would go deeper soon enough. And they soon got what they wished for, as a plan to explore deep inside the pyramid was approved by the commander. To my dismay, our company as well as the tank platoon were to go in with them in the expedition that was called Exploration Team 1. Normally, I would question the necessity of having so much firepower escort them, but my gut was telling me that there was danger in there, and perhaps bringing a little extra muscle wouldn't hurt. The first to go in were the tanks, followed by our company mounted on our M29s. At the head of our company was First Platoon, followed by my platoon, and then Company X, who were riding in their gigantic vehicle with a helicopter mounted on top. Behind them was our mortar section, followed by 3rd Platoon, who brought up the rear. My M29 was parked close to the entrance as the tanks began going in. As I sat there and waited, I couldn't help but stare at what lay ahead of us. It was nowhere near what I expected. I had caught glimpses of the surrounding grass earlier, but nothing more than that small patch of green. Being closer now, I was able to see further than that. To my amazement, I was looking at an environment completely different from where I was standing. The grass extended far beyond the entrance, going on and on seemingly for miles. In fact, it seemed to extend far beyond where the other corner of the pyramid was. Whether this was some sort of optical illusion, I couldn't tell from where I was at. Yet, that wasn't the strangest thing that I saw inside the pyramid. Looking up, I saw clear blue skies and a bright shining sun. This stunned me, and I found myself glancing up to the sky above me, and then back inside the pyramid. The weather was clearly different, nowhere near similar. It should have been impossible, but it was hard to deny what was right in front of me. It seemed that the pyramid had an entire ecosystem of its own. Now I understood why Company X was so interested in exploring this weird place. Although despite this, I still felt apprehensive at the idea of going in. The fear lingered in me. It lingered in all of us. In my M29 alone, the Marines sitting with me sat uncomfortable and shifted in their seats. They looked like men about to go to battle. They might as well be, since we were about to go into the unknown. When it was our turn to enter the pyramid, my vehicle was the first in my platoon to move in. As we drove through the entrance, I felt the familiar shiver through my body engulf me. And then I heard a whisper as if it was coming from behind me. "Abandon all hope." Almost instantly, I turned my head around, but nobody was there. The only thing behind me was the convoy of vehicles waiting to go in. And then I noticed that our vehicle wasn't moving anymore. Turning my attention to the driver, I noticed that he looked frightened and stiff. In fact, the other 2 Marines did as well. They must have felt and heard the same thing that I did. Clearing my throat, I did my best to push away any feelings of fear and present the stable figure of authority that the men expected from me. "What's the holdup, Sergeant? Get her moving." "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir," Sergeant Hodgins said, before hesitating again. Turning his head towards me, he gave me a look of uncertainty. "I just don't like this, sir." "You and me both, Sergeant," I told him. "But orders are orders. Now move this thing forward. We're holding up the convoy." With that, we got moving once more, and we were soon following the tread marks of the vehicles that went ahead of us. For the next hour, we drove through the lush green fields, leaving behind markers for us to trace back our steps, while at the same time taking in the scenery around us. It was a whole new world out there. It would have been a pleasant change from the cold environment that we had become accustomed to, had it not been the fact that we were going deeper into a potentially dangerous, uncharted territory. Even without any immediate danger, the place itself was unnerving. It was already evident to us that this place was far bigger than the pyramid outside, but as to how far it went on, we didn't know. With fields of grass that stretched out into the horizon and no signs of the interior walls of the pyramid, the place seemed to be endless. And to make it even more eerie, aside from the grass and the sky, there seemed to be nothing else in the pyramid. There were no features around us, no woods, hills, or mountains in the distance. There were also no animals here, no life that crawled or walked around in the grass. It was essentially empty and quiet, and that made all of us uncomfortable. Eventually, we had to stop our advance in order for us to gauge our bearings and for Company X to take samples, set up equipment, and conduct tests. During that time, the helicopter atop the vehicle was launched on a reconnaissance mission, with a pilot and a Company X observer on board. Meanwhile, us Marines started up on a defensive perimeter. With the terrain we were in mostly flat though, the best that we could do was quickly carve out foxholes on the ground. Expecting that we would move out soon though, most of the men did this half-heartedly. About a half hour after we stopped, I noticed something off. Out in the distance, a little speck hovered. Focusing on it, I noticed that it was getting bigger with each passing minute. At first, I assumed it was the helicopter coming back. But however, as it drew closer, I noticed that its silhouette did not resemble that of the HOS-1. Instead, it seemed circular, like a sphere. I radioed this sighting to the captain, and soon everybody in the expedition was looking towards its direction with great curiosity. Soon these feelings changed to apprehension and concern, as the sphere started to become bigger and bigger. It was heading our way quickly. As it approached, the expedition team command passed on strict orders not to open fire unless they said so. I transmitted this down to my squads, but as I watched the sphere get closer to us, I felt my throat dry up with each word. At first, I thought it was a machine. After all, no creature could ever be that big and move that quickly in the air. Looking through my binoculars, though, I realized that wasn't the case. To my horror, its exterior was flesh, while all over its surface were large, unblinking eyes. Darting left and right, up and down, these eyes scanned its surroundings. However, as I stared at it through my binoculars, these eyes soon turned towards me and stared back. Frightened by its glance, I quickly looked away, feeling my fear rise to greater heights. It was as if it had stared directly at my soul. I didn't have enough time to further process what I saw though, as the sphere suddenly accelerated even more in its approach until it was around 5 miles away from our forward pickets. At that point, it suddenly stopped and hovered in place, its multiple eyes looking down on us. Around 1/4 mile in diameter and littered with eyes that stared down, the sphere hovered with its intimidating presence. Everyone stood still for the next few seconds as we all held our breath and wondered what was about to unfold. So far, the sphere had done nothing threatening, but I doubted that the judging eyes of that thing did not have malicious intent. And then it spoke. Without a mouth, it spoke. Without an orifice of any kind, it spoke. In fact, I don't even think its words traveled in the air. It felt as if it spoke directly into our minds instead. My, its voice droned in my head. Look how far you humans have come since I taught you how to build your first weapons. To think you all managed to make this on your own, without the help of a greater being. You make me very proud. And then its eyes shifted away from us, its eyes turning towards the direction that we had come from. Turning my gaze behind me, I saw nothing but the grass that we had driven through. Despite this, the creature seemed to have been able to see something from its height, something that pleased it very much. You have come to free me. Its voice echoed in my head, a hint of satisfaction evident with each word. Now you humans make me even prouder. It has taken you a few ages too long to achieve this, but I am glad to see that you're willing to repay your great teacher for the knowledge that I had bestowed upon you. I will be sure to reward you once we rid the world of those who shackled me. And with that, the sphere began to move again, this time towards the direction that we had come from. It was heading for the entrance. At that moment, a crackle came from the radio. My RTO didn't have to repeat it for me to hear the order. Engage, open fire. Wasting no time, I passed on the order to my squads. As I did this, the other members of the team began to fire, with the tank platoon being the first one to do so. The sound of their guns echoed in the empty field as I watched their shells impact on the creature. At first, I thought they wouldn't do much damage. After all, what were our simple weapons to do against such a powerful creature? To my amazement though, the shells penetrated its skin and left a rather large hole in which a dark, foul-looking fluid poured out. As more shells from the tank struck the creature, more wounds were made and more of its blood poured out. The rest of our weapons failed to inflict similar damage, as our rifle and machine gun fire seemed to have dealt no harm to it. Despite this, the few tank shells that struck him seemed to have given the creature sufficient pain, as it let out a shriek that rang loudly in our ears. For a moment, firing stopped, as all of us did our best to cover our ears. But with the noise being sent straight to our mind, there was no effective way for us to block it out.
I know the taste of that steel,
it hissed, halting in its movement and turning its gaze down towards us once again.
That is Raphael's staff. You foolish humans have melted his symbol of guidance and turned it into a weapon of war. It would have made me happy had it not been made for the purpose of harming me.
Suddenly, the creature began to glow, becoming brighter with each second. Eventually, it shone as bright as the sun, blinding us all and forcing us to close our eyes and look down.
You didn't come here to free me. You came here to kill me, you ungrateful pests. This is how you repay me for the art that I've shared with you.
Looking at the ground near me, I saw that it no longer shone bright from the light that the creature radiated. Daring to look up, I found myself staring at something different. Instead of the large sphere of flesh and eyes from earlier, a tall, gigantic figure in the shape of a man now took its place. A man that glowed bright white, with 4 dark circles on its abdomen being the only blemishes. I quickly realized that this must have been the impact wounds from the shells earlier. To my disappointment though, the holes were slowly becoming smaller as if they were healing. With its feet firmly planted on the ground a few miles ahead of us, and its head extending at least a mile up into the sky, it was a menacing sight. Turning its head to look down at us, I saw its eyes glow bright and white, as the look of anger was evidently plastered on its face.
No matter how much you've grown in strength over the ages since we last met, it's still not enough to kill me.
It spoke through its mouth, for the first time hearing its voice in our ears instead of our minds.
I don't even need a single weapon to destroy you all.
And with that, I watched as it raised one of its arms up above its head before swinging it downwards towards the ground. Time seemed to move slowly as its hand got lower and lower. All we could do was watch helplessly and pray. A few of the tanks opened up against the monster in defiance, but it did little to stop it. Its hands ended up impacting at least a mile in front, but it didn't need to hit us directly for us to feel its effects. Just as its hand plunged and embedded into the ground beneath us began to shake and crack open, and then I felt the ground beneath me begin to rise before suddenly being tossed up into the air. Looking around, I saw earth, men, and tanks rise up, before all the dirt turned into a cloud that shrouded my view. The next few moments were filled with screams and pain, as I and everyone else plummeted back to the ground. I then felt myself impact the ground, as bits of dirt and rock dropped on me. Eventually, my vision began to fade and I passed out. When I opened my eyes again, I thought that I had died. However, the sound of a familiar voice told me otherwise.
Hey kid, you alright?
I saw a man kneeling above me and shaking my body. Staring at him, I soon realized that it was the Company X man that I had met a few times before. Seeing me looking at him, he gave me a toothy smile and a pat on the shoulder. What happened?
Well, old Azazel over there threw a tantrum and slammed his hand on the ground.
It was quite a sight from the chopper, but I don't think it was all that fun for you boys on the ground. And then it all came back to me. The horrors of what happened flashing before my eyes. Looking around, the results of what had happened was all too evident and clear. The ground was littered with mounds of dirt and rock, with the bodies of the men who were just with me littering the ground. For a moment, I thought that I was going to be sick. I had been too young to be in the war, but the older hands in the battalion had told me that the sight of death was something that I would never forget. Now that I came face to face with it, I realized that what they said was true. Oh, that's only part of it too. The Company X-Man told me. The rest of the boys were buried beneath the dirt. You were lucky though. I found you with your head stuck above the ground and I easily dug up the rest of you. Can't say the same for the rest though. You're the only one who was in the ground that seems to be alive. I stared at him, trying to process what he said. My platoon, my company, all the members of the exploration team, all gone just like that. It was a terrible thing to hear, and I found myself suddenly shaking at the thought that so many lives were lost in such a short amount of time. Gradually though, I managed to pull myself together as I stared at the man in front of me and gave him a quizzical look. How about you? How did you make it? He gave me a grin and gestured behind me. Turning towards the direction that he was pointing, I noticed the helicopter parked on a relatively flat portion of ground, as its pilot stood beside it, pouring a can of fuel into its tanks. Oh, we were on our way back when Azazel started rampaging. Speaking of which, we need to get going. He must be outside the pyramid now. He would have gotten out quicker, but those hits from the tanks seemed to weaken him a little bit, no matter which form he took. Now come on. With that, he offered me his hand and helped me up. Following him towards the helicopter, I riddled him with questions, as I tried to grasp what had caused the death of everyone except us. Who is Azazel? I asked, remembering the name he kept on repeating. A fallen angel, he explained as he gestured to me to get on board the helicopter. Once I was inside, he and the pilot joined. We were supposed to get rid of him, but it looks like Plan A didn't work very well. He continued as the pilot started the engine. Plan A? What's Plan B then? Oh, an A-bomb, he simply said. My eyes widened as I heard that. An atomic bomb. Yup, he said with a nod. We got one hidden at base camp, but it's no ordinary A-bomb. It's a special one just for our giant friend. It's surrounded by large pieces of Raphael's staff, the same thing we used to open this pyramid, as well as these shells fired to hurt him. The plan is that the bomb's explosion would throw those large chunks like shrapnel and kill the fallen angel. At that point, the helicopter began to rise up and the pilot wasted no time banking the aircraft forward in order for us to race towards the opening that we came from. Of course, this also means we need to get out of this place before the bomb explodes. The members of my team still at camp have orders to set the bomb detonation if Azazel ever emerges from the pyramid. If it blows up and knocks the fragment of the staff that's keeping the pyramid open, then we'll be trapped in here forever. I'm not sure about you, but I'm not a fan of eating grass until I die, so I hope we get out in time. With that thought in mind, I gazed at the green expanse in front of us and prayed that we would make it out. Each minute we spent in the air felt like an eternity. Anxiously, I scanned the horizon, hoping to see the inner walls of the pyramid and the opening that led back out to the ice. But each minute showed none of that. Deep inside, I was about to give up hope, as despair slowly overtook me. But that small part of me held on and kept me going, telling me that my luck has held up so far and it wouldn't fail me now. I don't remember how long we spent flying over the grass, but eventually we saw it. However, there was something different. The opening was bigger now. In fact, it was bigger to the point that we didn't need to descend the helicopter to get through. We could easily keep straight in our altitude and we would be out. Not only that, but the gap through the walls seemed to be battered, far different from the clean edges that it had earlier. It was as if someone had forcefully expanded it. Meanwhile, below the entrance, lying on the ground, was the gigantic Arctic vehicle. But it was no longer on its wheels and it was instead toppled down and lying to one side. Luckily for us, the pole that it was carrying was still firmly attached to it, and it was still close enough to the wall to keep it open. Azazel, the Company X-Man muttered. He must have gotten through already. All three of us knew what it meant. There was little time left for us to get out. Pushing forward and flying through the now larger opening, we soon found ourselves removed from the endless sea of green grass and back to the ice shelf. But we couldn't breathe a sigh of relief yet, as we could see the bright and glowing figure stomp through the snow and move towards the camp. Observing the camp itself as we cautiously approached, we saw men scramble in different directions, trying to get away from the giant fallen angel that approached. For the most part, Azazel didn't seem to pay much mind towards them. Instead, he kept his head locked forward and looking towards the distance, where the terrible blizzard continued to rage outside of our protective dome. From what I could tell, it seemed like he was planning to walk his way out of the ice shelf. At that moment, though, a familiar blinding bright glow suddenly engulfed our vision. I immediately knew what that meant. The fallen angel had transformed back to a fleshy sphere, floating above the ice and gliding towards the edge of the ice shelf. Although still slow, he was now able to move more easily across the terrain. The team had most likely armed the bomb by now and timed it for detonation, the company man said, before ordering the pilot to fly towards the camp's airfield. "How much time does that give us?" I asked. 30 minutes, probably less," he grimly said. "If we're lucky though, we can catch one of the R4Ds evacuating my team and anyone sensible enough to go there instead of running recklessly away from camp." I nodded but didn't feel confident that my luck would hold up anymore. After all, I had so many close brushes with death now. Surely I wasn't going to be granted another. Turning my attention back towards Azazel, I watched as he floated above the camp and flew right past it. At that point, he didn't seem to bother us humans anymore, and he was more determined to get away from this place just as much as we were. He was slow, but he was making progress. Sooner or later, he was going to exit the dome and move into the blizzard, and I had no doubts that he could easily navigate through the storm. Once he was past that, he would be free to wreak havoc upon the world. The only way to possibly stop him now was to use the bomb. I was torn between wanting the bomb to not explode yet so that we could escape, and wanting the bomb to explode now and to stop Azazel. Anxiously, I switched glances between the fallen angel and the airfield, hoping that one would stay within sight while the other got closer. Eventually, the pilot of the helicopter descended the aircraft and rather roughly landed it in the airfield, just next to the remaining R4D that was about to taxi into the Marston mat. Rushing out of the helicopter and waving our hands towards the moving aircraft, we eventually caught the attention of someone inside as the plane slowed down and the port side door opened. "Henderson, is that you?" A man at the door shouted at the Company X-man with us. "We thought you and the rest of the expedition were dead." Yeah, the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated," Henderson shouted back. Rushing towards the aircraft and jumping on board, we found ourselves jammed with the rest of the people who packed the aircraft. It seemed that every space inside was occupied, and I was worried if we would be too heavy to get off the ground. That was out of my control though, and all I could do was hope that the pilots were good enough to save us. The inside was quiet as the plane got on the Marston mat. Everyone was holding their breath and praying. Then the engines began to rev up, its sound echoing inside the cabin. Gradually, I felt the aircraft lurch forward before gaining speed as it went on. As we moved along the runway, the aircraft seemed to struggle to get up, the weight of all of us on board making it really difficult. Stuck in a corner that was far from one of the windows, I was unable to tell how much runway we had left. To my great relief though, I soon felt the aircraft rise from the ground. Although sluggish, it at least constantly rose from the ice. Despite this, no one cheered. Everyone still held their breaths, knowing that we weren't out of the danger yet. "We're about to go past the dome," I heard one of the pilots shout out from the open cockpit. "Everybody hold on." I had nothing much to grab on from where I was, so all I could do was hope that I wouldn't get flung around too much once we had entered the blizzard. At least the pilots were kind enough to count down the second for us in the back. 60 seconds, they shouted. 30, 20. At that moment, a bright light engulfed the interior as a sudden brightness shone from the windows. A few seconds later, a powerful explosion echoed from outside, its loud snapping sound deafening me. Before I could comprehend what was happening, a strong gush of wind came from behind the aircraft, which shoved the plane forward and made it shake wildly. And then as suddenly as everything happened, the bright light from the windows disappeared, leaving the cabin in darkness. "We're out of the dome and in the storm now," a cry came from the cockpit. They didn't need to tell us though, as we in the back were tossed around from the shaky flight of the plane. Already sore from being thrown in the air earlier, I found myself getting even more bruised and battered as I got struck by the walls of the cabin and the people around me. While all of this was happening, a familiar noise screamed into my mind. Something loud and piercing my head. It came as a shriek of pain that went on for minutes. Closing my eyes and placing my hands on my head, I cursed and prayed that it would stop, but on and on it went. Managing to open my eyes briefly, I saw the other people in the cabin with similar pained expressions as me, as they fought off the pain of the noise and being thrown around. The aircraft itself was flying worse and more erratic too, and I wondered if it was because the pilots were struggling to fly under the piercing noise, or because we had reached a worse portion of the blizzard. Eventually though, the noise subsided, and the pressure in our heads began to lift. Sighing in relief, I turned towards Henderson, who was pressed next to me. "I think we might have gotten him," he said, giving his signature toothy smile. Well, that was some good news. Now we just needed to survive to tell the tale. For the next 15 minutes, we endured the storm, doing our best to get out of it. At many points, I thought the plane would be torn apart, but we managed to hold on and push through just as my luck had to that point. To our great joy, though, we emerged from the blizzard, battered but alive. Flying over the ice pack, we eventually made it to the outer group ships. We then had to endure one last piece of danger as the fleet carrier was not designed to receive an aircraft as large as ours. Because of that, we had to do a risky water landing in the freezing Arctic waters. Luckily for us though, the landing was smooth as any water landing could be, that is. We were quickly rescued by one of the destroyers, where we were checked by the medical officer before being sent to the fleet carrier for debriefing. While waiting for that, I would learn that at least 100 men managed to escape and survive the base camp. But only me, Henderson, and the helicopter pilot survived the pyramid expedition. Following the debriefing, all the survivors were sworn into secrecy, and I had no problems with that. After what I had been through, all I wanted was to forget the horrors of the experience. Besides, it's not like anyone who didn't experience it would believe me anyways. So for decades, I kept it to myself. I now break that silence and write this to you as a warning. Don't think of it as a far-fetched story written by a senile old man, because I know the truth, even if it was kept hidden and away from the public. Your father tells me that you have gotten a job in one of those Arctic research stations, and I'm proud of you, and I will not get in the way of your dreams. I just want you to know that the Arctic is not what it seems to be, and it's far more dangerous than you think it is. Before I retired from the Marines, I used my connections to get in touch with Henderson again. We hadn't seen each other since the expedition, but I was able to meet up with him again in his office in California. As it turned out, he was still active and was working on a new secret project that he couldn't talk to me about. That was fine, I didn't need to know any of it. Instead, I asked him if he knew what had happened to Azazel after the bomb had exploded. We sent a second expedition months after the one that we were in, he told me. I wasn't personally there, but according to the reports, a trail of his dark blood was found leading back into the pyramid. So he's still in there, probably healing. The bomb must have hurt him pretty badly though, because he's taking his time before coming out again. Coming out again? I questioned him. He nodded grimly. Yeah, he took the fragment of Raphael's staff with him. He can get out anytime he wants to. He's just waiting for the right moment.
They sent for me in the dead of winter. It was the season of the long night in Antarctica, when the sun refused to rise and I had no idea what to expect. Even the instructions were vague, almost cryptic, except for one clear detail. I was to report to a research outpost near the pole, isolated in the most desolate place on Earth. As my plane landed, a storm whipped the ice, wind screeching and rattling the metal of the craft. The sky was a bruised shade of purple, and the lights from the base ahead blinked like tiny, pale stars. I felt an oppressive weight settled on my chest the moment that I stepped onto the icy ground. A young soldier, face half hidden under a hood and goggles, approached. He looked relieved to see the priest's collar under my thick wool coat, a good feeling despite me being clearly out of place. "Father Martin?" he asked, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his mouth. I nodded, clutching my bag close, feeling the bite of the wind seep through every layer. "I am, and you are." "Corporal Haynes, sir," he replied, standing stiffly. "They've been waiting for you. You're to come with me to the briefing room immediately." I followed, casting a last look at the endless stretch of ice, only broken by low hills and jagged cliffs in the distance. There was nothing here but emptiness and the howling wind. The silence was unlike anything that I had ever known, vast and profound, but laced with something unsettling. I pushed the feeling aside as we reached the entrance. Inside the outpost, I was met with metal walls, harsh fluorescent lights, and soldiers in somber green coats, glancing at me with something that I couldn't quite place. We passed down narrow corridors until Haynes stopped outside a heavy steel door. He knocked and a voice inside called for us to enter. The door creaked open to reveal a man in a crisp uniform, older, with an air of authority that distinctly marked him as someone in command. He stood when I entered, offering a sharp nod. "Father Martin," he said, extending his hand. "Colonel Beckett, thanks for coming." I shook his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip. "I wasn't given many details, Colonel, only that I was needed here for something unusual." He exchanged a look with Haynes, and I caught a flicker of discomfort in his expression. Yes, we apologize for the secrecy. There are certain elements of this mission that we felt best to leave unsaid until you arrived." I raised an eyebrow, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. "Go on." He hesitated, just for a moment before continuing. "There's a formation nearby, a cave. It's something we found while mapping this area. Strange, enormous, almost like a natural monument. We've had personnel go in and out of it, but it's difficult to explain." Beckett's gaze settled on me, and in his eyes, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Fear. "I think it's best if you see it for yourself," he said quietly. The drive out was grim. The wind had picked up, tearing against the sides of the vehicle like it was clawing to get in. Outside, snow and ice stretched endlessly, broken only by jagged, leaden rocks protruding like the spine of some long-dead giant buried beneath the white. Corporal Haynes drove in silence, his hands clutched on the wheel. I sat in the back with two soldiers, and neither spoke. They watched the windows, stiff and tense, as if the very land outside might put up a fight against us. Colonel Beckett had given me minimal information before sending us off. "The cave, there's something about it," he had said, staring down at a map on his desk, though I sensed he wasn't really seeing it. "We had a team survey it when we first found it, but they didn't get far before they started acting strangely. One of them even." He broke off, and I had seen a shadow flicker across his face. "How do you mean, acting strangely?"
I had pressed, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. He looked up at me, his face set, yet his eyes betrayed something close to dread. Degradation, paranoia, hallucinations. One man said he felt like he was being watched. Another claimed he could hear voices whispering. They didn't make it far into the cave before I pulled them out. It's as though the place has a presence. He cleared his throat. I don't put much stock into the supernatural, but my men do. They'll feel better having a priest along. Now, as we drove toward that ominous formation, his words replayed in my mind. Something about it has a presence. The soldiers and I remained silent until finally the vehicle stopped. Haynes killed the engine and the sudden silence was so intense that it was almost violent. We stepped out into the biting wind, and there, only a few yards away, it stood. A massive stone formation jutted out of the ice, half buried, its shape tenebrous and abrasive against the pale landscape. It had to be about 150 feet tall and 50 feet wide. The entrance itself was a wide black opening, rounded at the edges with jagged rocks outlining it. The snow seemed to pile around the cavern in unnatural drifts, almost as though the cave had disturbed the ice into cracking and shifting at odd and unnatural angles. One of the soldiers, Private Mills, stood beside me, his voice low. "It doesn't look right, does it?" "No," I murmured, swallowing. "It doesn't." Sergeant Davis, the tallest of the group, tried to break the tension with a forced chuckle. "It's just a weird rock formation," he muttered, though his gaze never left the entrance. "Nothing more." I glanced at him, studying the tightness around his mouth, the way he clenched his rifle. They all carried their weapons as if they expected something to leap from the depths at any moment. "Look," Davis continued, his tone gruff as he glanced at me. "I don't know if you really believe in any of this priest stuff, but just stay close, all right?" I nodded, offering what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "I'll stay close." The men visibly relaxed, but only just. Together, we approached the mouth of the cave, each step crunching under us while the wind muffled out all other sounds. The entrance loomed larger the closer we came, and my skin prickled with this inexplicable sensation of being watched, as if something lay beyond those pitch-shaded pools of emptiness and was observing us from within. Private Mills stopped suddenly, his gaze fixed on the ground near the opening. "Look," he whispered, and we followed his gaze. Tracks. Bare footprints in the snow, leading toward the cave mouth and disappearing. The size of the prints suggested they weren't from a grown man, but rather from a child. "Who?" Corporal Haynes began, his voice barely audible. "No one's been out here recently," Sergeant Davis muttered, voice strained. "And no one goes barefoot in this weather. They'd be dead in minutes." I felt my hand instinctively reached for the small silver crucifix around my neck. Beckett's words echoed in my mind. "There's something about it. A presence." Without another word, we moved forward, stepping into the cavern's gaping mouth. The light behind us faded rapidly, and warm, damp air seemed to seep from the walls, filling the space with an almost suffocating blanket. The beams from our flashlights swept over the cave walls, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to ripple with the flicker of movement. Inside, the air carrying a faint earthy smell that reminded me of wet metal. Something about it made my skin crawl, though I couldn't place why. "Father," Sergeant Davis said, his voice rough but low. He shifted on his feet, eyes avoiding mine. "Before we go deeper, maybe you could, say something for luck." The other soldiers nodded, their faces tense and wary in the dim glow. Despite their rifles and years of training, they looked like nervous young boys. I nodded, gathering my words, feeling the chill settle deeper into my skin. I raised a hand, fingers grazing the crucifix that hung from my neck. Almighty God, we place ourselves in your hands as we walk through this place. Shield us and guide us and let your light be our way. Protect these men and keep them steady, and grant us the courage to see this journey through. As I spoke, a low, distant noise echoed through the cavern. It was faint, just a whisper of a sound, but unmistakably unnatural. A slow, grinding roll that rumbled through the walls. It was as if the stone was shifting, growing under some unimaginable force. It lingered in the background, fading in and out like a dull protest. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, gripping their weapons a little tighter. Mills spoke up, his voice soft. You heard that right? I mean, that wasn't just me. It's probably just the earth is settling, Davis offered, though his voice rattled. These caves are old, should be shifting ice, rocks settling, something like that. Yeah, Corporal Haynes muttered. Just rocks. I lowered my hand, tucking the cross back into my jacket. We'll be all right, I said, though my words sounded hollow even to my own ears. We pressed on, single file, stepping deeper into the cave's dark throat. The walls grew narrower, angling downward in a gradual slope. It felt oddly smooth underfoot, not jagged or broken as one would expect. Instead, it was a continuous winding path, curving gently downward like the inside of some strange winding funnel. The rock itself a shimmer when the flashlight beams caught it, not with any mineral gleam but something damp, as if coated in a thin film of syrupy liquid. Beyond that was a subtle warmth coming from the walls, far warmer than the frozen air outside. It feels different in here, doesn't it? Mills muttered, his eyes darting over the tunnel walls. I mean, shouldn't it still be cold? Davis scoffed, though his expression remained taut. Just keep moving, Mills. It's probably a geothermal fissure or something. Heat trapped in the earth. But he too kept looking around, his jaw clenched tight. As we descended further, the path narrowed, forcing us to hunch down as the ceiling dipped lower. The walls seemed to curve inward, and the ground began to slope even steeper. The air grew heavier, thick with a smell that was hard to define, a mix of wet earth and almost something rotten. Every few steps, the faint grinding noise rumbled, a distant echo that hummed in the background like a low grovel. There were no obvious signs of danger, yet a growing unease twisted in my gut. The walls seemed to pulse slightly the longer you stared. I reached out, touching the stone as we passed. It was oddly soft and slick beneath my gloved fingertips. I pulled my hand back, wiping the liquid quickly on my coat, but the sensation lingered. It feels weird, doesn't it? Mills whispered, his voice barely audible. Like we're not supposed to be here. Keep quiet, Haynes hissed, though his voice was strained. He glanced at me, something pleading in his eyes. Father, do you feel anything strange here? I took a breath, steadying myself. There's something here, but let's just keep our focus, I murmured. They nodded, but I saw their apprehension deepen. We pressed on in silence, each step echoing through the hollow passage, a relentless descent into the unknown. And behind us, the cave walls groaned, as if watching and waiting with a patient yearning. As we pushed down, the silence between us grew heavier in tandem with the walls closing in on us. Ahead, far deeper in the cave, a faint throb pulsed through the air. A slow, steady vibration that seemed to resonate through my head. I couldn't place it. Perhaps the sound of gushing water pulsating from somewhere deep within, but that didn't feel right. Do you all feel that? Mills asked, his voice cracking. He had been quiet for some time, but now his face was pale, eyes darting over his shoulder every few seconds. Sweat glistened on his brow despite the chill that lingered in the tunnel. Just keep moving, Sergeant Davis barked, though his voice was shallow with his own apprehension. Nothing's here but rock. Keep your head on straight. But Mills seemed barely to hear him. He stopped, his breathing offbeat, and his gaze went distant, fixed on some invisible point in front of him. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, feeling his muscles tense beneath my grip. Mills, I said softly, stay with us. He blinked, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. I don't think I'm supposed to be here, Father. I feel like something's looking at me. Something that I left behind. His hand trembled as he touched his forehead, muttering to himself. I don't know how could I have... What do you see? I asked, though my stomach churned, sensing the weight of the horror that he was holding. It's her, he whispered, a voice trembling. My little girl. She's looking at me, but her face. His hand shot to his mouth, stifling a gasp. His eyes went wide, pupils dilated, as if he were witnessing something unspeakable in the shadows. I could see the fear in him intensify, his gaze wild, darting back and forth as though tracking an unseen presence in the air. She's just standing there, he whispered, his voice cracking. But there's something wrong. Her skin's so pale, like she's been dead for days. Her eyes are... Oh God, no. Private, Davis snapped, his voice louder this time. Snap out of it. But Mills only whimpered, his body trembling as if caught with a fever. She's asking me why I left her alone. She's asking why I wasn't there for her when she was sick. Oh, sweetie, I was deployed, I tried, but... His voice faded, eyes wide with panic as he seemed to peer deeper into the shadows. He swayed on his feet, his breathing ragged, and in that moment I saw something break in him, something primal and terrified. His gaze turned inward and I felt a pulse of dread shoot through me as he spoke again. She wants me to end it, to end all of it. His voice had taken on an eerie, hollow tone. She says I need to carve her back into me, to feel what she felt, to make up for what I've done. Mills, I gripped his shoulder, but his skin was clammy and unresponsive. His mind trapped us somewhere I couldn't reach. Whatever you're seeing isn't real. You're here with us. Don't let it take you. But he wasn't listening. His hand drifted toward his belt, where a hunting knife gleamed faintly in the dim light. His face twisted a horrible pained grimace, as though he was caught between agony and a sick, twisted desire to give in. She's saying it's the only way. If I just cut deep enough, I can take her place. Maybe then. The throb around us grew louder, pulsing in rhythm with his words. It reverberated through the walls, a sinister vibration that seemed to pulse along with his heartbeat, driving his breath into shallow gasps. I could feel it now, a faint humming beneath my skin, as if something in the depths of the earth was responding, reaching out to him with invisible fingers, pulling him closer to the darkness within himself. Mills, don't, Haynes said, his voice barely above a whisper, fear choking his words. You're not alone, okay? Whatever you're seeing, it's not real. It's the cave that's messing with your head. Don't listen to it. But Mills' expression remained fixed, a horrific blend of grief and resignation. His eyes lost to whatever horrors that he alone could see. His grip tightened on the knife and his gaze shifted between each of us as if we were strangers. Something evil flickered behind his eyes, a darkness taking root, curling its tendrils around him. "She wants me to bring you all with me," he said softly, his eyes empty and cold. "She says we all deserve it." He raised the knife and I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he aimed it at his own throat, his gaze turning inward again, lost to his private nightmare. Without hesitation, I grabbed Mill's arm, my fingers tightening around his wrist to stop him from lifting the blade any higher. I could feel the violent shudder of his body under my grip, his muscles straining as if caught in some dark trance. His eyes were wild, rimmed with distress and desperation, fixed on some terrible vision beyond my sight. "Father, help me," he whispered, but his plea was swallowed by the cavern walls and around us. The pulsing sound only goaded him on. I tightened my grip on Mills, feeling the tremors racking his body as he clutched the knife, poised under his own throat. His eyes were distant and unfocused. He was muttering under his breath, fragments of sentences, each more desperate than the last. "Father, please," he rasped, his voice barely his own. "She's calling me. She says I need to." "No," I interrupted, my voice steady, though I felt the bitterness of woeful inadequacy seeping down into my soul. I drew in a deep breath, reaching for words that I prayed would hold power. "God Almighty, Lord of hosts," I began, my voice low but resolute. "Banish this darkness from his mind. Cleanse him of this evil." Mills twitched violently as I spoke, his eyes rolling back for a moment before he shuddered, clutching his head. His hand dropped the knife and he began to curl up, his face slick with sweat. But as I continued the prayer, his features softened, the manic light in his eyes dimming, replaced by something fragile, barely holding on. "Holy Father, I ask for your light in this place of shadow. I ask for your strength to guide this man, for your mercy to protect him. Shield him from this darkness and hold him close to your grace. Deliver him from evil." The words spilled out of me, fervent and desperate, and I felt the walls themselves recoil from the sound. The pulsing throb that echoed deeper and grew louder, sharper, each beat shuddering through the ground beneath us, almost as if in protest. Mills twitched, his face contorting, his mouth opening and closing as if fighting to speak, but his eyes remained haunted, his lips moving silently as though wrestling with voices that only he could hear. "Father," he gasped, his voice thick with fear. It's still here. I can feel it clawing inside me. It's angry, so angry." I gripped his shoulder tighter, refusing to let go. "I know, but you're stronger than it. Listen to my voice, not its lies. You are still here with us. With me." Around us, the cave seemed to breathe, a low groan vibrating through the walls as if we had disturbed something that had long slumbered. A faint foul wind stirred, carrying the sharp, acrid scent of sulfur and death. I felt the air tighten, pressing in on us, the very stone resenting my prayer. "Do you hear that?" Davis softly muttered. He glanced down the passage ahead where the walls grew narrower. His gaze turned distant, his head tilting slightly as if listening to some type of sweet song. Haynes stared transfixed, his own eyes glassy and unfocused. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "Do you see it, Davis? The light?" Davis nodded slowly, a strange smile creeping across his face. "Yes, it's calling us. Down there, it's—" "Wait," I said sharply, but they ignored me, stepping forward in unison, almost as if they were sleepwalking. I kept my hands on Mills, who had begun to shiver violently, his eyes darting toward Davis and Haynes with a growing panic. "No," he croaked, his voice hoarse. They can't go down there. Don't let them." "Davis, Haynes," I called, but they didn't turn back, didn't even acknowledge me. They walked deeper into the tunnel, following some invisible beacon. their footsteps steady and unwavering. Mills clawed at my hand, his voice frantic. They're walking into it, Father. They're walking right into it. A cold dread filled me as I watched the two soldiers disappear into the shadows, moving with a mechanical calm. I could hear them murmuring to each other, their voices faint. Do you see it? Davis was saying, his voice a strange mixture of awe and reverence. It's so warm. I can feel it, like a heartbeat. Yes, Haynes replied, his tone equally entranced. It's been waiting for us, hasn't it? All this time. Father, please, Mills whispered, his face contorted in cold sweat. Don't let them go any deeper. It's feeding on them, it's pulling them in. I squeezed his shoulder, feeling his pulse racing beneath my hand, erratic and panicked. Hey, stay with me, Mills. Hold on to your faith, your strength. Whatever we're facing, we'll face it together. But as I looked down the darkened tunnel, the faint light from Davis and Haynes' flashlights faded into the depths. Mills gripped my arm, his eyes wild and wide but somehow steady, as if he had found some last flicker of strength within himself. Father, he rasped, pulling me close. You need to go. You have to find them and bring them back. I shook my head, reluctant to leave him behind. Mills, I can't just leave you here. We'll go together. He forced a pained smile. No, you need to go without me. I'll be fine. I can hold my ground here, he said, his gaze distant, a shadow of uncertainty flitting across his face. I'll survive, but they won't if you don't find them. I hesitated, feeling the pulse of trepidation deepen in my stomach, but his grip on my arm was firm, his gaze insistent. He was right. Every second we stayed here, the others drifted further into whatever nightmare lay ahead. I gave him a nod, murmured a quick blessing, and left him curled up in the flickering half-light as I ventured further into the cave. The narrow path twisted downward, deeper than I thought possible. The walls closed in, damp and pulsing with awful warmth. I quickened my pace, calling out their names, but only my own voice echoed back, swallowed quickly by the oppressive dark. Just as panic began to claw its way into my chest, I caught a flicker of movement ahead, a figure small and pale, stepping out from the shadows. It was a child, barefoot and thin, with snow-white skin and hair that shimmered like gold. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, clad in an oversized white shirt. His eyes held a peculiar brightness to them, an unsettling mix of innocence and wisdom that was entirely wrong for someone so young. He looked up at me with a faint smile, a smile that was warm, inviting yet somehow wrong. Hello, Father, he said softly, his voice lilting, almost musical. You're looking for your friends, aren't you? But it's too late. They're in the process of leaving us. I felt a cold stab of anxiety pierce my chest. What do you mean? Where are they? The child's smile widened, his eyes darkening with something almost playful. They're lost. They were afraid, Father. They wanted something to cling to, but you left them. Just like you left Mills. His words twisted inside me, an accusation that felt like a blade sinking deep. Mills wanted me to go on, I said, my voice faltering slightly. But he asked because he knew you wanted to leave him. The child replied, his tone soft and coaxing. Mills wanted comfort, Father. He wanted someone to stay by his side, to hold him through the fear. You left him alone, and now he's found his way out. I staggered, horror dawning as I understood his meaning. You're lying. Mills is okay. The child tilted his head, his expression both sympathetic and eerily amused. You'll see, you left him to die and now he's gone. He's not the first that you've left, Is he, Father? I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to recoil. The child's words cut deep, touching on wounds that I hadn't known were there, wounds I thought that I had forgotten. You've sacrificed much, haven't you? The child continued, his voice gentle now, almost inviting. A life of loneliness, the vows you took, the vow of chastity, the vow to remain alone in the name of God. No wife, no children. A man who gives everything only to receive nothing in return. His words sank into me, each one twisting with a dark familiarity. I had spent countless nights wrestling with that emptiness, praying for strength, trying to fill a hole I could never speak aloud. You deserve peace, Father, the child whispered, stepping closer. You've served enough. God sees your suffering. He wants you to rest. He wants you to be free, to find comfort. If you let go, if you just let go, He'll welcome you with open arms. A martyr, a true saint. He reached for my hand, his touch unnaturally cold. If you end it now, God will still love you. He'll forgive you and you'll never be alone again. My heart pounded, and I felt the weight of his words pressing into me, filling me with a strange, almost seductive numbness. The endless years of service, of sacrifice, of feeling adrift in a world I could only watch from the outside. It all loomed before me, magnified in his gaze. The child smiled, his expression achingly beautiful and sinister, his eyes glowing with that unnatural light. Take comfort, Father, he murmured. There's peace waiting, if you'll only reach for it. I stared down at him, my hand trembling in his icy grip. The pulsing throb in the walls seemed to synchronize with my own heartbeat, a steady, relentless rhythm urging me to give in, to find the release that he promised. The urge to surrender, to let go, it tugged at me, tempting me with a potent, honeyed sweetness. My hand still caught in the child's cold grip, it trembled. I felt his promises sinking into me, filling every hollow place, every forgotten ache, each whispered with a gentle cruelty that coaxed me toward surrender. But deep within, something resisted, an ember that refused to extinguish. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and felt that familiar weight of my weapon, my rosary. Closing my eyes, I took a steadying breath. I clutched the first bead between my fingers and began to pray, my voice a murmur beneath the oppressive presence. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. The child's face darkened, his smile faltering as he watched me. Father, he said, his voice soft, a trace of warning in his tone. You're clinging to something that can't help you. Those words, they're meaningless. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. A faint twitch flickered in his expression, and his grip on my hand tightened painfully. You don't have to do that, Father, he hissed, his voice softening to a venomous murmur. You're wasting your time. God won't hear you here, and she doesn't care. Pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. The boy's face began to twist, his soft features stretching and contorting, his skin paling to a deathly yellow. His eyes grew darker, almost cavernous, swallowing any semblance of humanity. Its childlike limbs elongated, thin and bony, with its small hands growing into long and claw-like fingers. The thing's mouth twisted into an obscene grin, revealing sharp, uneven teeth that glistened wetly in the dim light. I stumbled back, clutching the rosary to my chest as the creature stood before me, now a hideous, twisted apparition of what he had once appeared to be.
You think you can resist me?
The voice that came from his mouth was no longer that of a child. It was a guttural, grating growl, resonating with a power that shook the very air. The walls seemed to tremble, responding to his words as if they too were a part of him, a living, breathing extension of his will.
You're standing in my flesh, priest.
He sneered, gesturing to the walls around us.
You walk through my veins, feel my breath in the stones, hear my pulse in the dark. This is my body and you are nothing but a morsel within it.
The walls seemed to close in around me, their surfaces undulating subtly, taking on a sickening organic quality. The faint pulsing sound echoed louder, its rhythm a slow, hungry beat.
You and your friends will never leave.
He continued, his voice dripping with malice.
I will consume every one of you, swallow you whole and bury you in the depths of my being.
Its form rippled, growing larger, filling the cavern with its grotesque presence. Shadows writhed around it like tendrils, reaching toward me with claws that seemed to scrape the very air. I felt an intense, crushing weight pressing down on my body. But then, with a single sneer, it vanished, dissipating like smoke into the void. Silence fell thick and heavy. I took a shaky breath, clutching my rosary, forcing myself to focus, to stay grounded. Just as my mind settled, I saw them. Davis and Haynes standing at the edge of a narrow drop deeper in the tunnel. Their backs to me, their faces turned downward. They were muttering to themselves, their voices low, strained as though speaking to something just below them. "Davis!" I called out, stepping toward them, my voice echoing in the silence. He didn't respond. His eyes were vacant, unfocused, staring into the pit below. In one hand he held his rifle, the barrel tilted toward his jaw, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Haynes stood beside him, clutching a knife, the blade pressed to his wrist, his hand trembling. I felt a cold wave of horror wash over me as I realized what they were about to do. "No, don't!" I cried, rushing forward, but they seemed oblivious to my presence. Their faces twisted in silent agony, their expressions lost to some invisible torment. "Mother," Davis whispered, his voice cracking, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, I didn't want to. I can't live with it anymore." Haynes, his voice soft, distant, echoed his pain. "I'll see you soon, Sam. I'll make it right. I'll make it right." "Stop!" I shouted, my voice desperate, my hands reaching for them. "You don't have to do this. Whatever you're seeing, it isn't real. This place is lying to you." They faltered just for a moment, but the darkness around them seemed to throb in time with their despair, pulling them back and feeding on their guilt, their pain. "Davis, Haynes," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Listen to me, you are not alone. Whatever you're seeing, whatever you're hearing, it's a lie. I'm here, we're in this together." For a brief, fragile moment, they seemed to hesitate, their hands loosening, their weapons lowering. But the shadows deepened, as though the cave itself was watching, waiting, hungry for their surrender. Before I could stop him, Davis squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed deafeningly through the cave, reverberating off the walls in a single, heart-wrenching note that seemed to shudder through my entire body. I watched helpless as he crumpled forward, his body folding onto the cold stone, his eyes glassy and distant, his lips parted in an expression of intense grief. The darkness around him seemed to twist with satisfaction, engorging as if absorbing his very essence. Then, as his body relaxed, he tumbled downward. "Davis," I whispered, but he was already gone. Haynes, now standing alone, trembling and dazed, pressed the blade against his wrist. He sliced through. Red flowed immediately, pooling in dark rivulets against the stone. His face pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. He swayed, barely able to keep upright. "No!" I cried, rushing to his side, grabbing his wrist to stop the bleeding. My fingers slipped in the warm, slick blood, and I fought to keep a hold on him as he gasped, his gaze swimming with a mixture of horror and confusion. "Haynes, stay with me," I urged, tearing open the emergency kit strapped to his vest. I pulled out the tourniquet, quickly wrapping it around his arm and tightening it until the bleeding slowed. "This place is lying to you, feeding on your fears. Don't let it win. Don't leave us." Haynes blinked, his face contorting in pain as he seemed to come back to himself. His breathing slowed and his eyes met mine, clear but twitchy. "Father," he whispered, voice shaking. "I saw my brother. He was calling me." "It's not real," I said, steadying him with one hand on his shoulder. "Whatever you're seeing, whatever you're feeling, it's this place trying to break you. Keep your focus. We're getting out of here together." I began to recite a prayer under my breath as I clutched my rosary in one hand, anchoring myself in Haynes and the only protection that I knew. As I spoke, Haynes' breathing steadied further, his gaze sharpened, and I could see the light of awareness return to his eyes. He nodded weakly, gripping my hand as if holding onto a lifeline. Thank you, Father," he whispered, his voice broken. Just then, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber, joining my prayer. I looked up stunned to see Mills stepping out of the darkness, his face lit with a fierce, defiant faith that seemed to pierce the shadows around us. He was muttering prayers of his own, his lips moving in a steady, relentless rhythm, as though each word was a weapon against the dark. His eyes bright with determination. "She told me to come here, Father." With Haynes leaning heavily on my shoulder and Mills at my side, we turned and began to make our way back up the twisted path that we had come from. Every step felt like a battle, the cave itself seeming to shift, the walls narrowing and closing in. Dark tendrils of rock and earth creeped inward, scraping against our arms and shoulders, pushing us back with an almost living hostility. "Move faster," Mills urged, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward as the tunnel seemed to twist and distort, bending strangely. Haynes groaned, his face pale from blood loss, but he kept moving, leaning on both Mills and me. I could feel his strength fading, yet his steps remained steady. A deep growl rose from the earth, reverberating through the cave like a predator's roar, and the ground beneath us buckled, sending cracks spidering out along the path. The walls writhed, forming ghastly shapes, hands reaching out, mouths gaping open, eyes staring with unseen malice. "Keep praying," Haynes murmured, his voice shaking. "It hates that." With a surge of courage, I raised my voice, shouting the prayers that I had once whispered, my voice echoing through the passageway, defying the cave's relentless grip. Mills joined me, his voice strong and unwavering, and Haynes, though weak, whispered along, clinging to the words. "Deliver us, Lord, from every evil." I chanted, my heart pounding as we pushed forward, each step a desperate race against the cavern's grasp. The tunnel seemed to lengthen, stretching out as if mocking our escape, but we pressed on, refusing to surrender to the hungry beast that surrounded us. The walls screamed in rage, a high-pitched keening sound that set my teeth on edge. But I held tight to my rosary, feeling the warmth of my faith steady me, guiding our way through the twisting, winding path. At last, a sliver of light appeared ahead, faint but unmistakable. The cold, pure light of the outside world spilled into the tunnel, piercing the darkness. Summoning our final reserves of strength, we stumbled toward it, each step tearing us from the cavern's grip, until with one final lurch, we staggered into the biting Antarctic air. I could feel Haynes sag against my shoulder, Mills steadying him from the other side as we struggled to put distance between ourselves and that hellish place. The men were exhausted, their faces pale, their breaths shallow, but we were out. We had made it. Behind us, the entrance to the cave began to shudder, the walls buckling inward as if drawn by some invisible force. The shadows within twisted and writhed, giving one last violent tremor before the entire cavern collapsed inward. Rock folding over itself like the closing of a monstrous jaw. The ground heaved and shuddered. A deep resonant roar shot through the ice and snow as the cavern swallowed itself, disappearing into the earth. "Move," I shouted, urging Mills and Haynes further back as the earth beneath us bucked and lurched, the very land shifting under our feet. We scrambled up a ridge, the snow clinging to our boots, the biting cold tearing into us. We barely made it to the top of the ridge when a powerful quake rippled through the ground, an immense tremor that nearly knocked us off our feet. Below, the ground where the cave had been began to sink. Snow and rock fell into the abyss as if dragged by some unspeakable hand. I watched, awestruck and horrified, as the earth closed in over the spot, leaving nothing but an empty patch of snow and jagged rock. The throbbing hum that had haunted us faded, replaced by the full silence of the frozen wasteland. Mills held his head, his face pale. "God, it's like it was never there." Haynes, his arm still bound tightly by the tourniquet, gave a slow, shaky nod. "Just gone." We stood there, shivering in the cold, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. The cave, the presence with it was all buried, hidden beneath the ice, as if nature itself had decided to seal away that unspeakable terror. After a long, silent moment, I placed a hand on Haynes' shoulder and nodded toward the distant lights of the base camp. "Come on," I said quietly. "Let's get you some medical attention." The trek back to the base was a somber one. None of us spoke, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own memories of what had transpired. I led the way, clinging to the faint light of my fate, feeling its warmth steady me against the bitter wind that clawed at us, the chill more biting than ever. When we finally reached the base, Colonel Beckett was waiting for us, his face unreadable. He studied each of us in silence, his gaze lingering on Haynes' blood-soaked arm and the distant look in Mills' eyes. Without a word, he gestured for medics to take the two men, and I watched as they led Haynes and Mills away, their expressions weary. The Colonel and I were left standing alone in the freezing night, his gaze sharp and searching as he turned to me. "Well?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "What happened down there?" I took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. How could I describe what we had seen, what we had felt? How could I explain the cave that had nearly swallowed us, the unholy presence that had lingered inside? I hesitated, finally meeting his gaze. "It was something evil, Colonel, something beyond our understanding. I don't know what you expected us to find, but whatever that was, it's better left buried." The Colonel's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly, his eyes unreadable. "And the sergeant?" "Davis didn't make it," I said quietly, feeling the weight of those words settle heavily on my shoulders. "But Mills and Haynes?" I paused, glancing back toward the med bay where they were being treated. "Oh, they'll recover, physically at least." He nodded again, his expression softening just a fracture. "I'm sorry, Father, this wasn't... I didn't know that it would turn out like this." "Neither did I replied, clasping my hands, my fingers brushing the rosary that still hung around my fingers. "But it's over now. Whatever was in that place, it's gone." The Colonel watched me for a moment, his eyes filled with the weight of questions that he had never asked. He didn't believe in the supernatural, but even he could sense that we had faced something else. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. As I prepared to leave Antarctica, I felt an odd sense of peace mixed with sorrow. The darkness in that cave had nearly claimed us, but we had survived. And as I boarded the plane, I whispered one last prayer. A plea that whatever evil had laid beneath the ice would stay sealed and forgotten, hidden from the world for all time. I'm from the American Southwest, in what was once the Navajo Nation, and that's where this story takes place. I was dating this girl Gigi at the time. We had been dating for a little over a year at this point and had both just graduated high school. One weekend, Gigi's grandparents asked her to house sit while they were out of town. You see, they had a cat named Jack that her grandma absolutely adored, and they lived out in a secluded area 30 minutes from town, so it would be hard for someone to drive out there to check on him every day. It was an extremely rich neighborhood called Kayenta. Every home was a multi-million-dollar estate built on several acres of private property. So when Gigi asked if I wanted to stay over the weekend with her, I excitedly said yes. The first night her grandparents were gone, Gigi and I drove to the house, out in a gorgeous, fertile part of the Great Basin Desert. We followed the narrow road weaving between dunes until we came to the end of the pavement. From there, we drove another 10 minutes up a winding dirt road, and then we caught sight of the house. I was in awe. It was a beautiful adobe home with Mexican ceramic tile floors and Navajo tapestries decorating the walls. The first thing I did was wander through all the rooms, of which there were many. The front door opened into the living room, a spacious room with high ceilings, a fireplace, and plenty of seating. Just to the left was the dining room, kitchen, and bar. Through the living room was her grandma's library, a couple bathrooms, and the guest bedroom. And finally, across the hallway was the master suite, decked out with a bedroom, a bathroom, a shower room, a sauna, and a den leading to a private porch. The place was built like a maze, every room forked into two more with multiple ways to get anywhere. But my favorite thing about the house was how many windows there were. The walls of the kitchen and living room were entirely made of windows, so you could always take in the gorgeous desert view. We found Jake curled up on a couch in the den of the master suite. He was a large black cat with green eyes and was very friendly. "Hi, Mr. Handsome." Gigi greeted him with a scratch under the chin, just where he had liked it. "Oh, did you miss me, Jakey?" He stretched out his neck and purred, enjoying the attention. I chuckled. Pets having human names was always humorous to me. "Oh, who's a sweet boy?" Gigi said in a cute sing-song voice. We must have disturbed him, because as soon as Gigi stopped scratching him, he got up, stretched his legs, and walked out the cat flap in the door. "They just let him come and go as he pleases?" I asked. "Yeah, he knows his way back home," she said. "We just can't let him out after dark." After putting out some food and water for Jake, Gigi and I decided to follow his lead, and we set out adventuring in the sandy red hills that surrounded the house. Being an experienced hiker, Gigi had a path she liked to walk in the early mornings when she stayed out here. She guided me through the washes and ravines, and we talked and admired the beauty. We were about 20 minutes away from the house. I didn't know whose property we were on, but we had surely crossed out of Gigi's grandparents by now. After a few more minutes of walking, once all the houses were out of sight, Gigi started climbing up a hill. "Up here," she said. "This'll be perfect." The sun was just starting to set over the western mountains. If you've never been to the desert, let me tell you, the sunsets are the most beautiful I've ever seen. The sky turns into a painting palette, red, orange, pink, purple, and blue, fading to black as you look east, with millions of bright stars speckling the void. It was breathtaking. "You see that valley over there?" Gigi asked. Right at the slope of the mountain. I nodded. How many people do you think could fit in that valley? Like if they stood shoulder to shoulder? I thought about it for a second. Probably like the whole country. What? She exclaimed. You know that's like 350 million people, right? Yeah, but people are what, 2 feet wide on average, I reasoned, and probably less than a foot deep. If everybody got crammed in, I think we could hit it. Shit, we could maybe do all of North America. And Gigi wasn't having any of it. You had to retake algebra. There's no way I'm trusting your math. Algebra isn't real math. It's a puzzle with numbers, and I suck at puzzles. Gigi didn't respond, just kept staring off into the desert. After a moment, she said, The whole country, huh? And this valley is only a fraction of the whole planet. There's so much out there I bet no one's ever seen. And been forgotten. Again, she just stood there, staring at the beams of sunlight behind the mountains. It was starting to get dark. We should go back to the house, she stated. The coyotes are going to come out soon. We were on our way back to the house. The sun had completely set now and darkness crept in fast. About halfway there, I felt the hairs raise on my arms. I got chills. It was a strange feeling. I hadn't heard anything unusual, but my brain was screaming at me. You're being watched. Before I could say anything, Gigi turned around and stared behind me. I think there's something following us, she said softly. She felt it too. Stay quiet, but act calm. I wanted to start booking it back to the house. Gigi had to tell me that that's a bad idea. You don't run from predators, she said. Right now it's just curious, but the second you start running, you become prey. And so we walked. The minutes felt longer at night. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step, like it was getting closer, surrounding me. A chill wind blew through the air, soft as a whisper. Gigi. Dread opened its eyes. Did you hear that? My voice trembled. Every inch of my body went cold. It was 70 degrees, yet the wind cut to the bone. Strange for October. I didn't hear anything. Gigi insisted, but there was fear in her voice. We're almost there. Keep going, slowly. Don't look back. Keep going, slowly. Don't look back. I kept repeating it to myself. It became my mantra. We were walking up the last hill now. My heart was pounding. I don't know what was following us, but it wasn't just a coyote. Keep going slowly and don't look back. The sand was loose beneath my feet. I prayed I wouldn't slip. If I fell backwards, the night would consume me. I knew it. Keep going slowly. Don't look back. Finally, we were peaking the last hill. Once at the top, under the light of the porch lamps, I turned around and looked. But there was nothing there. I had to laugh at myself. My mind had tricked me, let paranoia run rampant. It was only a coyote, I'm sure, if it was anything at all. Gigi and I walked into the refuge of the kitchen through the sliding glass door. In an instant, the warmth returned to my body, and a feeling of safety washed over me. We looked at each other, sharing a moment of peace, and then we started laughing. And no more night hikes. We agreed, happy to shrug the whole thing off. While we stood there laughing at each other, I couldn't help but admire how beautiful she was. Her long curly black hair, brown almond-shaped eyes, and freckled brown skin. Seeing her laugh and smile made me feel safe. Maybe it was the adrenaline still pumping, but she never looked more beautiful to me. You want a drink? She asked. That was exactly what I needed. Perfect opportunity to check out the in-home bar, I thought, but Gigi declared those bottles off limits. Oh, that's the expensive stuff. They'll notice if it goes missing, she explained. My grandma used to keep some in the library though. I'll see if it's still there." And she walked around the corner. I went to the den to check on Jake, but he wasn't on the couch. He wasn't in the living room or the kitchen either. Probably not a big deal. Cats have places they like to hide, and this was a huge house. Plenty of spots to choose from. Still, it had been a while since we last saw him. I figured I should let Gigi know. But upon entering the grand library, I instantly forgot what I went there for. Enormous floor-to-ceiling bookshelves built into the walls, lining the entire room filled left to right. No space was left unoccupied. There must have been 1,000 books in this room. I walked right past Gigi as she searched a cabinet to look at the selection. Many of the books were about the Navajo people, about their traditions and beliefs, and about their superstitions. One in particular caught my eye, a book about Yi Naudalushi, or skinwalkers, shapeshifters in Navajo folklore. I picked it up and opened it. Half the text was in another language, and what was in English was analyzing the parts I couldn't read. I kept turning until I came to a picture of a frightening mythical creature, unlike any that I had ever seen, like a feathered wolf with antlers and human eyes. Quite an unsettling drawing. "Aha!" I heard Gigi exclaim. From deep in the cabinet, she pulled out a perfectly cheap bottle of Bacardi. "This won't be missed. Had probably been forgotten about." She walked over and noticed what I was reading and visibly cringed. Put that away. I have nightmares about that book." "You've read this?" I was surprised. Gigi wasn't superstitious or all that into Navajo culture like her grandma. Never mind that most of the book was incomprehensible. "Oh, that and all the stories that grandma writes. She's really into skinwalkers." "I didn't know your grandma's a writer." "Oh, she's not so much a writer as, like she claims that they're real stories." "Yeah, but that's part of writing ghost stories. You don't start off by saying this is totally made up." "No, I'm not kidding. She actually believes this stuff." Gigi opened a small drawer under grandma's desk. "Check it out." It was an old Colt Peacemaker. Gigi reached into the drawer going for the gun, I thought, but her hand moved right past it and grabbed the box next to it instead. She lifted the lid. Inside was full of bullets. As she hand-loaded these, there's a pocket of ash inside, which is one of the only things that can hurt a skinwalker, according to her. Can it kill one? The only way to kill a skinwalker is to call it by its human name. I know it sounds stupid, but Gigi saying the words human name is what reminded me of Jake. "Have you seen the cat since we've been back?" I asked. "Oh, good call." She set the bullets and the alcohol down on the desk and headed to the master suite. "Jake," she called out while walking through the bedroom. No response. We entered the den where we last saw him. No sign of the cat. His food and water hadn't been touched either. And then I looked over at the cat flap in the door and remembered Jake leaving through it hours earlier. Gigi and I looked at each other, and I could tell that we were thinking the same thing. "Ah, shit, this is so bad," she was saying while opening the door to the porch. "This is bad, this is really bad." She turned on the porch light and looked around frantically. "Jake," she called out. "Jake, where are you?" "I thought you said you knew to come home after dark." I knew it wasn't helpful, but I said it anyway. "He does normally. That's why this is bad. Jake!" She stepped further out the door using the flashlight on her phone. "Will you go check the garage?" she asked me. "He likes to hang out there sometimes. I'm gonna look over here." I said I would and set off toward the kitchen. Now mind you, the garage isn't connected to the house. It's a detached garage about 10 yards away on the property. I was still a little paranoid about what Gigi and I felt out in the desert earlier, but I shook it off and I walked through the kitchen door and all 10 yards to the garage. Once outside, I flipped on the light and began searching. He wasn't under Gigi's grandpa's truck, behind the freezer, or in the tool cabinet. I double-checked, triple-checked every spot that he could be. I had looked everywhere and there was no sign of a cat. All I could do was put my hands on my head, take a deep breath, and prepare to give Gigi the bad news. I turned the lights off and I was about to step out when I heard what sounded like a soft exhale behind me. Immediately, I swung around and flipped the lights back on, but again, there was nothing. Actually, there was something. Well, kind of. Some hairs on the bench next to an open window. Not much, but I hadn't noticed it before. I picked them up and examined them closer. Black hairs, probably Jake's. Maybe he was close by, I hoped at least. I turned on my flashlight and ventured back outside. "Jake!" I called into the night. "Are you around here, buddy?" I moved slowly, deliberately, shining my flashlight all about, making sure that I didn't miss an inch. "Jake!" And then I heard something move in the sagebrush nearby. "Jake?" I said in a friendly voice. "Here, kitty kitty." I had my light shining down on the bush, only about 10 feet away. I could see the branches twitching and something furry moving inside it. I was sure that it was Jake, but the leaves and twigs were casting shadows and I couldn't see him clearly. "Come here, boy." And then the animal emerged from the bush. What it was, I couldn't say, but it wasn't Jake. For a second, I thought it might be a coyote, but this animal was much too large. It looked almost like a dog except for its legs, which were long and skinny and cloven like a goat's. It looked at me with very unusual eyes, close-set and expressive like a person's. It exhaled and I felt myself tremble. I thought of what Gigi said about not running from predators, so I started calmly backing up towards the house and not even turning my back. It slowly inched towards me as I moved, keeping its gaze on me the entire time. I was getting more and more unnerved the longer it looked at me. Dread opened its eyes. "Stop looking at me," I whimpered, continuing my slow retreat. I was starting to sweat now. My tremble had turned into a full shiver. Something about this animal was not right, not natural. I didn't like the way that it was looking at me. It was making me feel crazy, hysterical, like it was putting me under a spell. "Stop looking at me," I tried to command it. It exhaled again, almost like a laugh. I just kept backing up. The light from the porch was getting brighter. I kept thinking I should be there any second, just a few more steps, but with every step I took, the beast took one too. Never getting closer, never letting me get too far away. Always within its grasp, like clay in its hands. Its eyes reminded me. Those eyes. I felt like I was going mad looking into them. They were black at first, weren't they? I had to ask myself because now they were a deep earthly brown. So familiar looking. Finally, I took one more step back and I felt my hand touch the door handle. I slid open the glass door and got inside as fast as I could, locking it behind me. The animal walked right up to the house, continued staring at me through the glass. But the glass wouldn't stop it, I was sure. The way it looked at me, I knew nothing could stop this beast. It was determined, and it would have me. It would break through the walls and drag me out into the night, never to be seen again. It exhaled again and fogged up the window, and then turned around and walked back into the darkness. As it left, I felt myself return to normal. Dread went to sleep. Senses came back to me. I could taste my mouth again, feel my skin, hear the blood flow in my head. My whole body had been buzzing, but it was quieting down now, like the spell was wearing off. And then I remembered about Jake. Shit. I walked back to the master suite, knowing that I would have to tell Gigi the worst-case scenario. Jake was nowhere to be found, and there was a menacing predator looking about. The porch door was open when I entered the den. Gigi was outside, still calling for Jake. I walked to the doorway. "Gigi," I called out. She flew back to the house, eyes wide and desperate. "Did you find him? Was he out there?" I wanted to tell her about the creature, but looking in her eyes made the feeling of danger wash away. Her deep brown eyes. What was I thinking before? Had I gone mad? It was just some weird, malnourished wolf of a breed that I had never seen. Why was I so affected by its stare? Why did it fill me with such dread? I had to laugh at myself. "What's so funny?" She was scowling at me. I forgot that we were still in a different kind of crisis. I needed to apologize and tell her that I hadn't found Jake, but before I could, we heard a distant sound. A meow. We ran out from the master suite to see Jake sitting in the porch light outside the kitchen door, right where the creature just was a few moments ago. "You little," and Gigi chastised him, sliding open the door and letting him inside. He brushed his head against her shins and meowed at her. She picked him up with a big sigh of relief. "We'll have to lock the cat flap so you don't run off again." And Gigi and I looked at each other and started laughing again. "Why does shit like this keep happening?" I said. "I don't know, but let's have that drink." We took a couple of shots to celebrate a job well done. Back in the den, Gigi and I found ourselves making out on the couch. Jake was sitting next to us purring and the TV was on. The worries of earlier were a distant memory. Everything was back to normal. Until we heard the swinging of the cat flap in the door. Crap, we never locked it, and he got outside again. Gigi and I both got up instantly, ready to search for Jake a second time. He couldn't have gotten that far. We'll just pick him up, put him back inside, and actually remember to lock the flap this time. I was reaching for the door when we looked down at the flap and saw Jake. He was inside, but we had just heard him leave. Unless he actually came in just now, but then when did he get out? He was just on the couch next to us. In fact, he was still on the couch. He hadn't moved, but he was also by the door. Our eyes flickered back and forth between the two black cats in the den. Something wasn't right. The Jake by the door started growling, hissing, puffing up its tail. The Jake on the couch jumped down with a growl of his own, and the two cats lunged at each other, screaming and clawing and biting. Not in a playful way either. They scrambled all around the room, becoming one amorphous black shape. I stomped on the ground and yelled, "Hey!" which seemed to scare them both, and they stopped fighting long enough for me to take one to the other room. But we had another problem. During the fight, we lost track of which cat was which, so now we had to figure out which one was Jake. Gigi looked at her cat and then came and looked at mine, and then she looked at her cat again and mine one more time. She couldn't tell the difference. They were identical black cats. In order to figure out which one was which, she said that we should stay in different rooms and study their behavior. My cat was friendly like Jake was, brushing up against me and wanting to be pet. He was clearly trusting of people and comfortable in his house. Gigi's cat was skittish and defensive, and was trying to escape. Confident that we had found Jake, we shooed Gigi's cat out through the door in the den, and then blocked the cat flap so that there would be no more intrusions or escapades for the night. "Do you smell that?" I asked. It hit me out of nowhere. The most god-awful smell that I had ever smelled. It stunk like death. "Oh, what is that?" "Oh, I think it's from them fighting," Gigi said. "Cats release pheromones when they're in danger. This must be what it smells like." "Oh, it's disgusting. Let's go to the living room." I couldn't stand to be in there any longer. It was evoking the same dread that I felt when the animal was staring at me, and I wanted to leave that far behind. Thankfully, Gigi agreed, and we grabbed Jake and took him to the living room where we continued watching TV. It was getting late now when Gigi and I were still in the living room, that feeling of being watched creeping back. I tried to focus on watching TV, but it was hard to ignore. Out here in the living room, the walls are made entirely of windows. but at night, when it's dark out, the windows turn into mirrors. You can't see out, but whatever is out can see in. Dread opened its eyes. The animal was back. I could feel it. It was standing right outside and staring at me. I knew that it was. The feeling was unmistakable. I couldn't see it, but it was right there, just on the other side of the glass. So close that the window would fog up if it exhaled again. Something moved next to me. I flinched, but it was only Gigi getting up. "What happened?" She laughed at me. "I'm just feeling uneasy. Do your grandparents not have any curtains?" I asked. She shook her head. "You have that feeling again." I nodded. "Well, I'm gonna go take a shower, maybe go in the guest room and sit on your phone while I'm gone." It was a good idea. There was only one window in there and it had a curtain. So as Gigi went to the master suite to shower, I went the opposite way. I never got to the guest room though, as on the way there I walked past the library. The Peacemaker was still out on the desk, next to that book. Something compelled me, so I opened it back up to the unsettling picture I saw earlier. I felt a cold breeze like dread breathing down my neck. I turned the page. The English contents talked about the abilities of the Skinwalker. They are tricksters, cunning, and manipulative. Not only are they shapeshifters, but witches also, and immortal, thrice cursed. Their magic can bewitch the heart, sending their prey into a state of hopeless dread, or a false sense of safety, like a siren song. The water to the shower turned on, but then right after, Gigi walked out of the room. "Hey, will you do me a big favor?" she had asked. "Will you go and get me a towel?" I set the book down on the desk. "Yeah, where are they?" "In the den." "What?" "That's right next to you, just go get one." "Oh, please, it smells so gross, I don't want to go in there." I stood my ground. "Just plug your nose, I believe in you." She scrunched up her face into a cute, jokingly angry expression and walked off. I giggled at that. She was adorable, and I looked back down at the desk, and this time my attention was drawn to the revolver. It was heavier than I thought it would be. I checked the rounds. All 6 were loaded. I raised it up and I aimed it at myself in the mirror. "You feeling lucky?" I asked myself. And then I heard Gigi call out from the shower. "Hey." "What's up?" I shouted back. In a sultry voice, she said, "Come join me." She didn't have to tell me twice. Even in her grandparents' shower, I wouldn't say no. I set the gun down on the desk and I exited the library, crossed the hall, and walked into the master suite. The shower room was through the bedroom and to the right, opposite the den. I was just making my way around the corner and I could see Gigi's leg behind a jutting wall, water dripping down the little blue shower tiles, when I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. It was a text from Gigi. "Wait," it said. It caught me completely off guard. I glanced back at Gigi's leg in the shower. I was about to say something to her when I got another text. "Don't go in there." What the hell? Did she have her phone in the shower? Why was she texting me when we were just speaking to each other? Why did she say there and not here? I was so confused. It felt like a puzzle, and I suck at puzzles. But then it clicked. Gigi had never gone back to the shower room. She was still in the den getting a towel. I didn't know who I saw in the shower, but it definitely wasn't Gigi. Dread wrapped its arms around me. The voice called out again. "Are you coming, babe?" And my breath caught in my throat. It was Gigi's voice, like exactly, no doubt about it. It was all too confusing. I didn't know what to believe. Dread held me tight. "I just had to get something real quick." It was the first excuse that I could think of. I backed up a few steps, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the door to the den crack open. I was frozen in fear, waiting to see what came out. The trembling was back. Finally, and with caution, Gigi peeked her head out. She was terrified, her skin colorless and her eyes wide. My phone vibrated again. Gigi held up her phone to show that the text was from her. "Get to the car, I'm going out the porch." I took a deep breath and started backing up out of the bedroom. I just needed to make it out the front door. The car was right outside and we'd be on the way. I inched away as quietly as I could, not daring to move too fast. You don't run from a predator. I had finally made it out of the bedroom, just around the corner and through the living room, and I'd be at the front door. I heard that thing call out from the shower again in a sweet voice. "Oh, don't keep me waiting." Dread kissed me on the lips. I gulped and felt sweat drip down my brow. I had to pick up the pace or I'd never make it out of here. My teeth were chattering in my skull. I was halfway across the living room floor when I heard wet footsteps coming out of the shower. I glanced behind me. The door was still 10 feet away. Wet footsteps came closer and closer. A shadow stretched across the tiles as it came into the doorway of the bedroom. And I prepared to meet this monstrosity. But when it turned the corner, my heart stopped in my chest. It looked just like Gigi. Same curly black hair, same brown eyes, same face, same body, same freckled skin. I couldn't tell the difference. The sight of her standing there, naked and dripping wet, forced me to rethink everything. Did I just make it all up in my head? Do I really believe in skinwalkers? Surely this is my girlfriend, and this whole night had been some delusion. It had to be. The alternative is downright mad. She put her hands on her hips. "Why are you running away from me?" she asked, scrunching up her face into that cute, jokingly angry expression that she did. Dread closed its eyes. This was Gigi. Every doubt that I had washed away. Even if you could imitate every freckle and curve, mimic expression down to the tiniest detail, you couldn't fake personality. Not like this. My guard was down and I was about to join my girlfriend in the shower when the front door opened behind me. It was Gigi. Her jaw dropped when she saw herself naked standing across the room. "We need to get out of here right now," she whispered to me, leaning out the front door. "Babe, what is that thing?" Gigi asked, trying to cover her body. I looked at one and then the other and then back again. Identical. Both terrified of the other, I didn't know what to do. Behind me across the hall was the library. The peacemaker should still be on the desk, fully loaded. I turned around and booked it as fast as I could. Both Gigis ran after me, but I was able to get the gun and cock the hammer and have it pointed through the door at them before either got too close. "Shoot her, babe," the wet one said. "No, I'm Gigi, I'm your girlfriend," the dry one protested. "She was gonna lure you into the shower and kill you." "She's a skinwalker," the wet one proclaimed. "They're liars, babe, don't listen to her. She was trying to lure you away from me. What do you think she was gonna do when she got you outside?" I didn't know who to believe. I pointed the gun at the dry one. "No, wait." Dry Gigi pulled her phone out. "I was texting you. You have my number saved. This is proof. Now shoot her. She stole my phone while I was in the shower. It doesn't prove anything. Please don't listen to her." Dry Gigi sighed, not knowing what to say to convince me. "Listen, if you shoot me, I'm gonna die. It's not enough to kill a skinwalker, but it'll kill me. I only ask, once you see that I'm dead, that you shoot her too and run away while you still have the chance." Surprisingly, the dread was absent, but I did feel an odd sense of safety. The monster was feeding me comfort now, disarming me, I tried to think. I pointed my gun at the wet one. "Where did we meet?" "A school," she said without hesitation. "Well, that's too easy," the dry one protested. "She could have known that through conversations that we've had." I pointed my gun at her next. Whose class did we meet in? We had two together, Mr. Dale and Mrs. Brody. The dry one was confident. I pointed my gun back at the wet one. She's a witch. She can read your mind. That's not true, the dry one protested. Skinwalkers can't read your mind. All they can do is deceive you. Two sets of identical brown eyes stared at me, pleading with me. The comfort being exerted on me made it hard to think clearly. I had to go with my gut. The gun was pointed at the wet one. I took a breath and I raised my finger to the trigger, but as soon as I touched the metal, the wet one darted back into the master suite. Not wasting any time, Gigi grabbed my hand and yanked me toward the front door. "Come on, let's go," she yelled. But as we were about to grab the handle, the wet one flew out of the den. We ducked down and let it crash into the wooden door above us, and then ran back to the library and shut the door. We looked at each other, horrified and out of breath. "What are we gonna do?" I whispered to Gigi. Wet footsteps slowly made their way closer to us, stopping just on the other side of the door. "Here, kitty kitty," it said in a voice unrecognizable. Dread licked its lips. Gigi pointed to the other door on the back side of the library. "That goes to a bathroom, and then down the hall is the guest room. We can leave out the window." I leaned up against the wall as we opened the door to our exit, peeking through the crack before moving forward. Once we had cleared the bathroom, we had to go through another door to the hallway. I aimed my gun out the crack as Gigi slowly opened it. All clear. I went first into the hallway, but as Gigi came behind me, the door creaked slightly. We both froze, listening. Wet footsteps. A shadow crept up from behind the corner ahead. Dread drew its breath. I dodged left into the guest room and hid behind the door. Gigi went right into the laundry room. I looked over at the window. There it was, the escape. I was so close to it, but I couldn't leave without Gigi. I had to get to the laundry room. The creature came walking down the hallway. My gun was pointed at the door, as steady as a trembling hand could aim. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps came down the hallway, but never seemed to pass. Dread bared its fangs. With each step, my chest beat harder and harder. I put a hand over my mouth to quiet my breathing. Finally, the footsteps passed me by, walking down the hall toward the library. Once it was several paces away, I silently peeked out the door. The creature didn't look like Gigi anymore. It had lighter hair and shorter, pale skin. With its back to me, I quietly shuffled across the hall into the laundry room. It didn't seem to hear me. The lights were off in the laundry room. I had to use my phone to look around. There was no sign of Gigi. Where had she gone? There must be another way out of here. I looked in the closet and sure enough, there was a door leading to the living room. I was collecting my nerves, gearing up to follow her out the door when I heard another voice. Familiar, but not Gigi's this time. It took me a second, but then I realized. It was my voice, coming from a different room. "Gigi," it spoke in a loud whisper, a perfect imitation. "I saw it go into the guest room. Let's make a break for the car." Dread sunk its teeth in me. Footsteps came from the master suite. It was Gigi. I bolted out into the living room to stop her, but the monster was already there, dressed as me, waiting in the trap. As Gigi came around the corner, I aimed my gun at the other me. "Stop!" I cried out. The creature turned to face me, smiling and taunting. I was looking into my own eyes. It had my face, my body, my expression down to the tiniest detail. Dread opened its mouth wide. Was I still me? Could I be if something else was too? If no one could tell the difference, if I couldn't tell the difference, was I ever really me? The monster cried out in my voice, "Stop looking at me!" Dread swallowed me whole. I was paralyzed. My vision narrowed until all I saw was black. I fell back to the floor, dropping the gun. I couldn't even crawl away as it walked up to me. Only as it approached me, it became Gigi again. A light glowed behind her. She was the only thing that I could see. She leaned over and stretched out her hand. "I'm offering you peace. Won't you take it?" Her smile pierced through me, and just like that, the dread washed away again, and serenity took its place. Something in me changed. I finally understood. If I was going to die, I should feel at peace about it. The creature wasn't offering me comfort. There's bliss in accepting the lie. "Yes," she assured me. "Don't fight anymore. You can rest now." I let her take my hand. She lifted me up off the floor and looked at me. Those eyes, her brown eyes, they welcomed me. I felt myself on the brink of passing over to somewhere else. The feeling of bliss was overwhelming and all-encompassing, but creeping up behind it, I felt an itch, a strong itch, strong and deep down to the bone. And then I heard the loudest sound that I had ever heard in my life. When my vision returned, Gigi was on the floor screaming and writhing. There was a hole in her chest already rotting. Confused, ears ringing, I frantically looked around to see what happened. Standing by the front door was Gigi, trembling, white knuckles gripped around the peacemaker, a thin flume of smoke billowing from the barrel. The creature struggled in agony on the floor. Its skin turned to feathers and then to wool and then to fur. It stumbled to its feet, walking on all four paws that suddenly became hooves. Each time it turned into something recognizable, it changed again, almost shimmering. Antlers started to grow in its head, and one last cry of pain. It broke through the glass of the kitchen door and ran off into the darkness. I thought I would feel relief, but as the creature disappeared, so did the peaceful serenity. It left me feeling hollow, save for the itch. Gigi looked at me and started crying. I couldn't cry. I had felt so much so intensely to be free of it now, it felt like its own death. I couldn't feel relief or joy or fear or pain, just an itch. "Am I dead?" I managed to ask. Gigi shook her head, sobbing. I couldn't understand why she was crying. "Hey, it's all right," I said. "It won't be coming back." I was so drained, all I could think to do was comfort her. "Let's go home, we don't have to be here anymore." She put her face in her hands and sobbed. "We can't go home," she said. "What do you mean, why not?" "It marked you." "It marked me." I looked down at my hand, the one that itched. It was turning dark, like I was frostbitten. My fingers felt rigid. I tried to curl them, but they stayed stiff. The itch was unbearable. I scratched it with my other hand, and to my horror, my rotten flesh peeled away, revealing long black talons. There it was again. Dread opened its eyes. "Well, what do we do?" I asked. It only made her cry harder. I inched toward her, but she backed away, terrified. "Gigi, what do we do?" She shook her head, and I gulped. Dread drew its breath. "Cut it off." The words just came out, I didn't even think about them. "What?" "Well, get a knife and cut it off before it spreads." Through tears she cried, "It's not like that. It's not like that." The words echoed off the glass walls and high ceilings. I fell back to the ground once more, knowing this desert would be my home forever. Dread lovingly embraced me. My face felt different now. I looked at the window to see my reflection. My nose and mouth were turning into a beak. I tried to cry and I screamed for Gigi to run away, but I couldn't make words. I squawked. Dread. It was all-consuming. I couldn't take it anymore. I wouldn't end up like that horrid creature, doomed to roam the desert, immortal, thrice cursed. "You know my name," I tried to say, but the words wouldn't come out. Dread laughed at me. "Say my name," I tried again. Gigi steadied her breathing. I don't know how, but I think she knew what I meant. She pointed the gun at me and pulled the trigger. My shoulder exploded. Bone fragments shot through me, and the force knocked me across the floor. The pain was like nothing that I had ever known. Like my blood had turned to acid and was melting through my tissue. Black smoke rose from the wound already festering. Dread opened its mouth wide. I screamed. We had become one. I was crawling towards Gigi, snarling at her and baring my teeth. She stepped away horrified. I almost felt ashamed, but the dread wouldn't let me. I was its puppet. Dread wore my skin. Gigi shot again, this time in my leg. The bone breaking was excruciating, but it stopped me from crawling. I laid there screaming, blood leaking out of me as my body tried to transform. "Say my name," I screamed at Gigi, hoping that she would understand. She raised the gun again. "Patrick," I heard her say. I never felt the third shot. Dread was all that remained.